Long before the first word was etched in clay, human eyes etched the sky into memory. In the hush of prehistoric nights, our ancestors found more than pinpoints of light. They discovered a living map of myth, season, and soul. Every flicker became a story, every shifting moon a clock, every rising sun a covenant. From the painted caves of Lascaux to the shadow-catching stones of Newgrange, their silent scholarship still aligns with dawn and solstice, whispering that we, too, are pages in the universe's oldest book. Look up and read what they wrote in starlight. In those constellations, they saw stories, not facts, but truths. Emotional truths, cultural truths. They found themselves in the stars. Over thousands of years, oral traditions encoded sky knowledge into chants, dances, and ritual. And remarkably, some of those traditions still echo today. Across the globe, some of the oldest cave art has been linked to celestial patterns. In France and Spain, Ice Age artists painted animals on walls, but above them, dots and clusters align with known star groups. This wasn't random. It was memory, immortalized in stone. To live was to be in sync with the cosmos. The sun's angle marked the planting season. The moon's cycle guided the tides, migration, fertility. These ancient people weren't detached observers. They were participants in a cosmic rhythm. And they felt the sky wasn't just above them. It was alive. A vast consciousness, watching, responding, maybe even feeling. They didn't need telescopes to be astronomers. They needed patience, reverence. Night after night, they waited, watched, remembered. They taught by moonlight. They studied through generations. Across time, similar themes emerged, despite vast distances. In Australia, the dark spaces in the Milky Way became the emu in the sky. In South America, constellations mirrored earthly animals. In North America, the Lakota spoke of sacred hoops in the heavens. All looking up, all finding meaning. In sub-Saharan Africa, Dogon elders shared knowledge of stars invisible to the naked eye. Long before modern discovery, they spoke of a companion star to Sirius. How they knew is still debated. Elsewhere, sacred places were built in alignment with the stars. Stonehenge marks the solstice sun. Nabta Playa in the Egyptian desert predates it, aligning with the summer solstice and Orion. These weren't mere calendars, they were temples to time itself. On the windswept hills of Ireland, Newgrange was built to capture sunlight on a single morning each year. As dawn breaks on the winter solstice, light floods the dark chamber inside. It's a moment of breathtaking symbolism, rebirth, light returning, a promise written in stone and shadow. Göbekli Tepe, in what is now Turkey, stirs even deeper mystery. Built over 11,000 years ago, before writing, before the wheel, its pillars seem to reference celestial events. This wasn't a fluke. It was devotion to the sky and to something greater beyond. But these ancient observers didn't see the sky as separate. They were part of it. The stars were ancestors. The moon, a protector. The sun, a giver of life. Their myths were not metaphors. They were reality. Lived truths. Sacred knowledge passed from heart to heart. As firelight flickered beneath ancient stars, stories grew. Of lovers split across the heavens. Of beasts chasing light. Of heroes rising in the east and falling each night. The sky was a grand stage, and every soul, somehow, belonged to it. There's comfort in that, knowing that even tens of thousands of years ago, humans felt the same pull, the same awe, that somewhere, a child stared up at Orion's belt with a gasp, and someone older smiled, remembering their first time too. They didn't just see stars, they saw journeys, a hero's path, a cycle of birth, death, and return. They encoded moral lessons into cosmic movements. The falling star might be a warning, the rising moon, a blessing. Even sleep was tied to the sky. The stars were guides not only for travelers, but for dreams. Sleep and starlight were bound together. One softened the day, the other opened the mind. Nighttime was sacred. Today, we name constellations with Greek and Latin, draw maps with precise angles. But the wonder, that's unchanged. The quiet mystery of a starry sky. The feeling of being small, yet connected to something vast. It began here. The first observers left no books, no lectures, no machines. But they left monuments, art, alignment, memory embedded in stones that still catch the light of the same stars. And it's not gone. So the next time you look up, remember, you're not just seeing light, you're witnessing memory, the echo of lives long gone, people who loved, feared, dreamed under the same stars. In a way, they're still here, still watching, still whispering. Look long enough, and you might just hear them. The night was not just a backdrop, it was a teacher. In its silence, people learned to listen. They learned patience. They learned patterns. And from those patterns, they built meaning. They learned that waiting could reveal everything. In quiet moments beneath the stars, they felt part of something eternal. Their questions didn't demand answers. They invited reflection. What lies beyond that shining point? Why does it return each year? These were not puzzles to solve, but mysteries to honor. And so, the heavens shaped not only their survival, but their souls. In honoring the sky, they honored life itself. They watched not only stars, but shadows. The way moonlight spilled across rock, the shape of darkness just before dawn. These were signs. The world above and the world below were mirrors. What happened in the sky reflected in the earth, in the body, in the soul. Some believed that the stars were holes in a great dome, letting in the light of the divine beyond. Others saw them as campfires of the gods, or spirits of the departed, looking down in silence. Night wasn't emptiness. It was full of presence. To the ancient Inuit, the aurora borealis wasn't just light. It was dancing souls. In Norse myth, the shimmering sky was the reflection of armor worn by Valkyries. The sky was always speaking. You just had to know how to listen. From Central Asia to the frozen north, shamans journeyed through the stars in trance and dream. The cosmos wasn't just out there, it was within. Entering altered states, guided by drums and breath, they travelled through constellations as if they were paths through the forest. And in every culture, children learned these stories early. Before they learned to write, they learned the stars. Grandparents pointed upward and recited tales carried across generations. The sky was the first school, and wonder was the first lesson. Time itself was written in the sky. A single star's rising could signal the flood. A constellation's appearance might mark the time to plant. To forget the sky was to risk hunger, or worse. In Mesoamerica, sky watching was serious business. Priests climbed temples to observe Venus and chart its appearances. Its cycle determined war, peace, and ritual. Their calendars, astonishingly precise, were written in starlight. Among the Polynesians, the sky was a map. With no compasses, they navigated thousands of miles by reading stars, swells, and birds. A navigator might lie on his back in a canoe, memorizing sky positions as the ocean rocked gently beneath him. Each star had a name. Each name, a purpose. To these sailors, knowledge of the sky was sacred, passed only to the worthy. The stars were not tools. They were ancestors, elders, friends. In the Andes, the Inca didn't just chart stars. They read the dark patches between them. They saw animals in the shadows of the Milky Way. A llama, a serpent. The void itself had meaning. Across continents, people built great structures to catch specific stars. Temples with narrow corridors that filled with light once a year. Pyramids aligned with cardinal directions. Cities designed to mimic constellations. Why such care? Why such devotion? Because the sky was the heartbeat of the world. To live well, one had to live in harmony with it. Even the shape of the heavens mattered. Was the sky a dome? A great canopy? A bowl turned upside down? Each culture imagined it differently, but always with awe. In many beliefs, the sky had layers, levels of existence stacked above the earth. Spirits dwelled in the higher realms. Some said the dead journeyed upward through stars, step by step, becoming light themselves. And comets. Comets were strange guests, not part of the steady dance. Sudden, unpredictable. They were often feared, harbingers of change, a king's fall, a great battle, a sign that the balance had shifted. But sometimes they were welcomed, signs of divine favor, reminders that the universe was alive and watching. Meteor showers drew eyes skyward. To see a star fall was to witness the divine in motion. Some whispered wishes, others offered prayers, a flash of light, and a lingering silence. They didn't explain it the way we might, but they didn't need to. They felt it, that deep stirring, that sense that the cosmos breathed alongside them. And that is the root of everything that followed. Myth, science, religion, they all grew from the same soil, from that primal gaze upward, from that first moment a person wondered, what is that? Even today, when satellites crowd the sky and city lights dim the stars, that ancient awe survives. In quiet places, on mountain peaks, at sea, in the desert. And in those moments, when the stars seem to whisper again, we're reminded we are part of a story far older than we remember. A story written in light. We are not the beginning. We are the continuation. In every corner of the world, that upward gaze wove a thread through time. A lineage not of blood, but of wonder. From the child in a grassy clearing watching the stars, to the priest atop a stone temple reading the sky, each one connected by curiosity. The sky asked no permission to amaze. Its beauty was given freely, and its silence invited questions no book could answer. Even without writing, without records, these early sky watchers shaped the very foundation of how we think, how we feel, and how we hope. Their myths became meaning, their alignments, architecture, their rituals, science in seed form. They didn't separate the physical from the spiritual. A rising star was both an astronomical event and a message from the beyond. This was their genius, not in splitting the world into parts, but in holding it whole. And when storms came, when crops failed, or the night brought fear, they returned to the stars, not for certainty, but for strength, for a sense that order remained, even when life felt fragile. These early cosmologies weren't primitive, they were profound. They offered people a place in the universe, a way to understand the unknown, and that desire to belong, to see meaning in the vastness, is as human as breath. We carry it still. The ancient skies of Mesopotamia were never silent. To those early civilizations between the Tigris and Euphrates, the heavens were alive with intention. Every flicker of light, every wandering star held a message. And decoding these messages became a sacred duty, one that would shape how humans read the cosmos for millennia. In the land where writing first bloomed, the sky was a tablet, and the gods were its scribes. The Sumerians looked up and saw more than stars. They saw a divine order, an architecture of will. The sky was the realm of An, the high god of the heavens. Alongside him, deities danced in luminous arcs. Inanna, goddess of love and war, was linked with Venus, her fierce brilliance appearing at dawn or dusk. Each celestial body had a role, a story, a power, and their motions were not random. They were divine messages, omens, warnings, promises. Priests and scholars, the Ummanu, watched the sky each night from atop ziggurats. These stepped towers rose above the city, bringing watchers closer to the gods. They kept careful records on clay tablets etched with reeds. What they saw wasn't just astronomy, it was divination. This wasn't science separate from spirit. It was both. To know the stars was to know the mind of the divine. Jupiter was associated with Marduk, the chief deity of Babylon. His position in the sky foretold fortune or disaster. Saturn, slow and heavy, was the star of Ninurta, god of war and agriculture. Mercury danced with Nabu, the god of writing and wisdom. But Venus, always Venus, was Inanna or Ishtar. Her disappearances and returns, her cycle of vanishing from the sky and then blazing back into view, were seen as reenactments of her descent into the underworld and rise again. Her story was the story of renewal, of desire, of divine power, cloaked in beauty. These cycles were not abstract. They were rituals in the sky, and their timing mattered deeply. In one of the oldest known texts, the Venus tablet of Amisaduqa, Babylonian astronomers recorded over 20 years of Venus's movements. They noted where she rose, where she set, how long she vanished, and when she returned. And each of these details was tied to meaning. If she disappeared in a certain part of the sky, it might mean famine. If she rose again swiftly, perhaps peace. This was astronomy as prophecy, and it was treated with utmost seriousness. Mesopotamians believed the gods communicated through the stars, but also through shadows and shapes in the heavens, eclipses, halos, strange clouds. An eclipse, in particular, was never just an astronomical event. It was the face of the gods darkening, a moment of judgment or warning. Rituals were held to protect kings and cities from the omens that might follow. To guard against misfortune, substitute kings were sometimes appointed. These temporary rulers took on the fate meant for the real king, protected by ritual, allowed to rule for a brief time, and then removed once the danger had passed. The sky, in this way, shaped politics. Each constellation had weight. The bull of heaven, associated with the god Enlil, charged through the skies with force and pride. The lion echoed the power of Ishtar. They saw animals above, not as mere shapes, but as celestial actors, performing dramas across the night. In their great epics, the gods often moved between heaven and earth. Gilgamesh's journeys were mirrored in the movement of stars. Enkidu, his wild companion, dreamed of the underworld, just as the stars sank below the horizon each night. The line between myth and sky was invisible. They were one and the same. Calendars emerged from this union. The phases of the moon structured time. Lunar months guided festivals and sacrifices. The solar year was understood not in isolation, but alongside omens and celestial events. Timekeeping for them was theological. Even weather was tied to the sky's shifting light. The positions of constellations hinted at coming storms, at winds from the mountains, at droughts along the floodplain. Nature and cosmos were threads of the same cloth. Over time, their star charts grew more refined. They mapped the constellations with care. The MUL-APIN, a comprehensive celestial catalogue, preserved names and paths of stars, including those near the celestial equator. The ecliptic, the sun's yearly path, was carefully observed. They knew it wasn't chaos. It was order, patterned and sacred. And from Mesopotamia's legacy, others would learn. The Greeks, the Persians, the world. Astronomy, as we now call it, was born not from cold observation, but from spiritual yearning, a desire to listen to the divine through light. But they didn't worship the stars. Not exactly. They honored what they believed moved through them, forces larger than human comprehension. And in doing so, they saw themselves not as separate from the cosmos, but as participants in its ongoing drama. In the temples of of Nippur, of Babylon, the sky's rhythms guided prayer. In the courts of kings, astrologers advised with sky-born insight. And in the lives of farmers, of merchants, of poets, the stars offered reassurance that life was not random, that even chaos had its season. When one looks at their clay tablets today, faint marks etched thousands of years ago, it's easy to forget how alive those marks once felt. They were not just records, they were voices, translations of the sky's whisper. And in their belief that the cosmos was speaking, the Mesopotamians gave us a gift, the first glimpse of a universe that could be known, not by dominating it, but by listening. Even now, when we trace the paths of planets, or read horoscopes, or marvel at eclipses, we echo their reverence. We continue a practice far older than most remember. The stars, to them, were never silent, and perhaps they never truly are. Even dreams, in Mesopotamia, were shaped by the stars. Dreams were not mere illusions of the mind, but messages, often from the gods. Their meaning could shift based on the night sky. A dream during the rising of Sirius might be a prophecy. During an eclipse, a warning. The alignment of sleep and starlight was seen as sacred. The The Enuma Anu Enlil, a massive collection of omens, became a cornerstone of celestial divination. Thousands of signs were recorded: positions of planets, phases of the moon, halos around the sun. Each had significance. Each could influence decisions of war, peace, and harvest. The sky was not background, it was script. This monumental collection, stretching over 70 tablets, was consulted by kings and seers alike. Its pages were not meant to be read linearly, but consulted like an oracle. It reflected centuries of watching, comparing, and remembering, patterns repeating across generations. A storm on the horizon was seen through more than weather. If a particular star flared on the same night, the storm might carry spiritual weight. If a shadow moved across the moon during the feast of a certain god, the omen grew louder. This blend of observation and belief did not make their insights any less precise. In fact, Mesopotamian skywatchers developed detailed lunar tables and predicted eclipses with surprising accuracy. They knew the heavens moved with purpose. They simply sought to understand that purpose on every level, practical and mystical alike. In the schools of scribes, students were trained not just in writing, but in counting stars. Geometry, measurement, and the naming of celestial zones were part of a holistic education. To write well meant to understand time, and time was written in the sky. They imagined the cosmos as a great tiered structure. Earth at the center, the heavens above in multiple layers, each ruled by divine forces. The underworld below, shadowed and quiet. The stars moved through these realms, and people, tiny, transient, still mattered, for they could observe, honor, and interpret. Their gods were not distant creators, but dynamic participants. Each sunrise, each eclipse, was the action of a divine being. Rituals were not simply symbolic. They were ways of harmonizing with cosmic forces. When the moon was new, offerings were made. When Venus disappeared, morning rites echoed her descent. And music. Music was used to mirror the movements of the sky. Temples employed musicians to play at certain hours, replicating celestial rhythms. Each note, each beat, aligned with phases of the moon or the shift of dawn. Harmony was more than beauty. It was a mirror of the stars. As the centuries passed, the city-states rose and fell. Akkad, Ur, Babylon. Yet the sky remained constant, and so did the watchers. In clay archives buried for thousands of years, we've found generations of observations. Fathers teaching sons, teachers guiding pupils, reeds scraping clay as Saturn's slow rise was marked, year after year. The depth of time in these records is staggering. Some astronomers recorded events their grandchildren would interpret. Knowledge was not hoarded. It was passed, preserved, shared. And from this devotion came influence. When the Greeks came into contact with Babylonian astronomy, they adopted and adapted. The zodiac, as we know it, traces back to these early observations. 12 divisions, tied to the sun's path. A circle of stories written across the ecliptic. The zodiac signs, Aries, Taurus, Gemini, are echoes of older Mesopotamian ideas. Not identical, but rooted in that same sky. The Greeks gave them mythic names, but the path had already been laid, brick by starry brick. And through those ideas, the heavens grew more personal. They were not only signs for kings, they became signs for individuals. birth charts, planetary rulerships, rising signs, all began here. In the dust and brilliance of ancient Mesopotamia, even the names of the days of the week reflect this lineage. Sunday for the sun, Monday the moon, and beyond, Mars, Mercury, Jupiter. Planets once watched from ziggurats, now embedded in our calendars. The legacy is quiet, but immense. Our timekeeping, our astrology, our fascination with celestial rhythms, all carry the fingerprints of those first great sky interpreters. But it's more than influence. It's a reminder that long before telescopes and spacecraft, there were minds who watched and wondered. Minds who didn't just seek control, but communion. Who saw not just stars, but stories. Not chaos, but choreography. They taught us to look up, not with conquest in our hearts, but curiosity. To trace meaning in light. To see our lives reflected in the slow, sure turning of the heavens. And as we gaze skyward today, beneath the same constellations they once named, perhaps we can hear them still, those ancient watchers, whispering through the wind. Watch, remember, and listen. In the quiet spaces between their cities and rivers, stargazing became a form of meditation. Shepherds in the fields watched the sky through long nights, their thoughts drifting with the stars. Traders on desert roads navigated by the constellations, whispering prayers to the gods they believed travelled with them. Even lovers, beneath palm groves and open sky, looked upward and spoke in metaphor. You are my moon, they might say, or your eyes shine brighter than Ishtar's return. The heavens belong to everyone, not only kings and priests. It was a shared sky, a common story told in countless voices. And that, perhaps, is the greatest gift the Mesopotamians offered us. Not only their charts and records, but the understanding that the cosmos is not something to own or master, but something to share, to witness, to feel, to pass on. To the ancient Egyptians, the sky was not just above, it was a living goddess, arching over the world. Her name was Nut, and her body stretched from horizon to horizon, adorned with stars. Each night, she swallowed the sun god Ra, and each morning, she gave birth to him anew. This was the sky, not as backdrop, but as being, divine, eternal, intimate. The Nile's rhythm, the heartbeat of Egyptian civilization, mirrored this cosmic cycle. As the river swelled and receded, so too did the gods move through light and darkness. The heavens were not apart from life. They were its blueprint. They believed that when the sun set, it did not vanish. It journeyed through the underworld, through 12 gates of darkness, challenged by serpents and shadows. Ra's nightly voyage through Duat was a myth and a map, a metaphor for death and rebirth, and perhaps for the movement of stars across the sky. Each morning, when the sun rose again, it was triumph. Light returned, life renewed. The sun, to them, was more than light. It was a soul, a spirit, and the stars. They were the ancestors, the justified dead, the Aku, watching, guiding, sometimes even speaking through dreams or signs. In the darkest hours, certain stars never set. They circled forever in the northern sky. These were the imperishables, the undying stars. To be among them was the highest honor. pharaohs aspired to join them. Death was not an end, but a transition, a stairway to the sky. Pyramids pointed the way. Each stone block of the Great Pyramid aligned with cosmic order. The entire structure was a machine for ascension. Narrow shafts led towards specific stars. Orion's belt, Sirius, the northern constellations. Not decoration, but navigation. Texts inscribed inside pyramids, some of the oldest religious writings known, detail this celestial journey. They speak of the king rising like the morning star, becoming one with the sky, floating, glowing, eternal. For the Egyptians, this wasn't poetic flourish. It was sacred engineering. The stars held maps for the soul. Death was not descent, but return, and return required preparation. The calendar, regulated by the heliacal rising of Sirius, known as Sopdet, marked not only the flooding of the Nile, but the renewal of time itself. This star's reappearance, just before dawn after weeks of absence, heralded the new year. Its timing was precise, its impact immense. Farmers, priests, and astronomers awaited it with reverence. Sopdet's glow above the horizon was a signal from the gods. Order had been restored. Temples aligned to this star. Cities echoed the heavens. In Thebes, the grand structures of Karnak and Luxor were designed to capture solstices, equinoxes, and stellar appearances. Light and stone danced together in sacred geometry. The goddess Nut herself was depicted inside tombs, painted across ceilings, her limbs arching over the sarcophagus. She was both protector and path. Her belly held stars. Her arms touched the horizons. She swallowed the setting sun and sang it back to life. And between her and the earth moved other gods. Thoth, keeper of time and moonlight. Horus, the falcon soaring through the sky. Osiris, whose death and resurrection paralleled the journey of Ra through the night. To watch the sky was to be in the company of gods. Priests studied the stars from observatories atop temples. They marked their movements with water clocks and plumb lines, tracking not just where, but when. Time flowed like the Nile, measured, sacred, and eternal. Their star maps divided the sky into decans, 36 star groups rising consecutively through the year. These decans regulated hours of the night, guided rituals, and perhaps even influenced personality and fate. They believed that a person's birth under certain stars could shape their destiny. While not astrology in the modern sense, it planted seeds of that concept. The sky's fingerprint was believed to rest upon each soul. Even in burial, orientation mattered. Tombs faced stars. Sarcophagi pointed west, toward the land of the dead, where the sun set, where Ra journeyed nightly. The body was laid to rest beneath carved constellations, surrounded by spells to guide it through the sky. Every night, in myth and ritual, the dead joined Ra on his boat through the underworld. They passed through gates guarded by serpents, past lakes of fire and walls of stars. If they succeeded, they emerged reborn in the eastern sky. The Book of the Dead, the coffin texts, and other funerary scrolls offered directions. Maps, passwords, invocations, tools for navigating the celestial realm. These were not metaphor. They were memory, repetition, cosmic practice. In sacred rites, priests reenacted these journeys. They carried statues of gods through temples, mimicking Ra's path through the sky. Torches lit the darkness. Incense clouded the air. The boundary between earth and heaven dissolved. Even music and chant followed celestial timing. Hymns were sung at key phases: dawn, dusk, new moon. Rituals echoed the sun's journey, guiding the soul with rhythm and breath. The connection between sky and state was unbreakable. The pharaoh was not just king. He was Horus in life, Osiris in death, Ra reborn each day. His legitimacy was written in the heavens. A failed alignment, a missed star, could unseat a dynasty. And so, the keepers of time and light held great power, not through force, but through knowledge. Their wisdom came not from conquest, but from looking upward. Night after night, they read the stories in the stars, not to control them, but to harmonize with them, to become part of their rhythm. The heavens were not a place to reach, but a place to return. Celestial architecture extended far beyond the Great Pyramids. In Dendera, the ceiling of Hathor's temple was carved with a celestial map, stars, planets, and a zodiac more than 2,000 years old. It showed that for the Egyptians, the sky was not just movement, but myth etched into time. They tracked planetary motion not to predict fate alone, but to honor cosmic cycles. Mercury, with its quicksilver path, was tied to Thoth, god of wisdom and writing. Mars, glowing red in the night, was linked to strife and action. These interpretations weren't fixed. They evolved over centuries, passed from temple to temple. Astronomy, mythology, and statecraft were interwoven in ways that feel both foreign and familiar. Foreign in their ritual intensity, familiar in their wonder. Even their myths of creation began with sky. Before land, before gods, there was the infinite. None. From it rose the mound of earth and the first light. The world emerged from water and was illuminated by the sun. That light was sacred from the very first breath of the world. In one telling, Ra created humanity from his tears. The stars, in turn, were born from his grandchildren. The divine family was written above, their stories told in constellations that shifted with the seasons. As the sun set each evening, it wasn't merely going down, it was beginning its trial. Through the underworld, Ra battled Apophis, the great serpent of chaos. Without these nightly victories, dawn would never come. Each sunrise, then, was more than a start. It was salvation. This theme echoed in the human journey. Just as Ra passed through darkness to rise again, so too could the soul. Resurrection wasn't a distant dream. It was the structure of reality. In this framework, life was not a linear path, but a spiral of return. The soul cycled through worlds, through trials, through purification, and the stars marked its path. Some texts describe how the soul, purified by truth and ritual, would join the sun's bark. Others say it would fly as a star, or rest in the field of reeds, a heavenly mirror of Egypt, full of harvest and peace. But only if one's heart was light. At judgment, the heart was weighed against the feather of Ma'at, goddess of truth, justice, and cosmic balance. If the heart was too heavy with wrong, it was devoured. If it was light, the soul passed on. The scales themselves, balanced as the stars above, echoed the belief that harmony was the highest law. And Ma'at was not only law, she was also order, cosmic order, the very pattern of the heavens. Priests who studied the sky served Ma'at. Every alignment, every festival, every timing was in service of her harmony. To disrupt the calendar was to offend the balance of the universe. That is why so many rituals began with stargazing. Before offerings were made, before chants were sung, the sky had to be right. The gods required precision, not from vanity, but because their world was built on rhythm, and the people trusted this rhythm. They lived by it. They planted when the stars told them to, celebrated when Sirius rose, mourned during lunar eclipses. Their cities moved to celestial cadence. Even their stories were timekeepers. Tales were told at certain moons. Myths retold when the sky echoed their meaning. Story and star were twins, reminding listeners of their place in the cosmos. It's easy now, under electric lights, to forget how luminous the night once was. How clear, how immediate. For the Egyptians, every night was an invitation to wonder, to remember, to belong. That belonging didn't require understanding every calculation. It asked only attention, reverence, a willingness to look upward and see more than light, to see memory, divinity, home. The sky was not empty, it was inhabited. In later dynasties, the influence of foreign lands blended with native beliefs, but the stars remained sacred. The Ptolemies, ruling from Alexandria, fused Greek and Egyptian astronomy, preserving and expanding the legacy. They built great libraries, observatories, and maps of the heavens, continuing the tradition of watching the gods. The sky evolved, but its spirit stayed constant. New names were given to old stars, but their power endured. Roman emperors traced their lineage to Horus. Astrologers across the Mediterranean consulted charts that still echoed Nut's arch, Ra's journey, and Mahat's balance. And though time wore away temples, though sands buried tombs, the stars remained, watching, remembering. Even now, satellites glide past the same stars that once guided pharaohs to eternity. Even now, when we speak of alignment, of destiny, of cycles, we are echoing Egypt. Quietly, reverently, perhaps without knowing, but something in us remembers. A stillness in the night, a breath taken under stars, a moment when the world feels vast, ancient, and filled with presence. In those moments, we are not just observers, we are heirs. We are continuing a dialogue that began beneath the sky goddess Nut, and has never truly ended. In the vast spiritual landscape of ancient India, the sky was not merely observed, it was embodied. It breathed with rhythm, pulsed with meaning. Time, creation, even the soul itself, were entwined with the movements of the heavens. The earliest Vedic texts spoke not of emptiness above, but of a cosmos alive with sound and intention. The universe began not in silence, but with vibration, a sound that expanded outward. This primordial sound was Om, the echo of creation, resonating through all things. And from that sound came the Hiranyagarbha, the golden cosmic egg. Floating in the void, it split open, and the universe was born. Sky and earth, day and night, light and darkness, all emerged from this cosmic seed, unfolding like a lotus. The sun, Surya, was not just a fire in the sky. He was a deity, riding a chariot pulled by 7 horses, each one a ray of light. His journey across the heavens marked time, structured ritual, guided life. The moon was Chandra, cool and reflective. He cycled through fullness and loss, a gentle rhythm of death and rebirth, mirrored in water, in mind, in breath. His phases were tied to festivals, to planting, to inner contemplation. Planets were more than wandering stars. They were grahas, seizing forces with distinct personalities, influences, and roles. Mars was Mangala, fiery and fierce. Jupiter, Brihaspati, a teacher and priest. Venus, Shukra, the guru of demons, bearer of both beauty and challenge. The skies above formed not just a calendar, but a moral landscape. Each planet carried karma. Each constellation, or nakshatra, revealed subtle energies. The heavens told not just time, but truth. The rishis, the seers of the Vedas, listened. In deep meditation, they received hymns, rhythms, formulas, many of them filled with references to the stars. The Rig Veda mentions dawn, ushas, night, ratri, and the sun with reverent regularity. The skies were sacred and sung. Astronomy, here, was not separate from spirituality. The Vedanga Jyotisha, one of the 6 limbs of Vedic knowledge, was dedicated to the study of celestial movements. It guided rituals, sacrifices, and timing. The exact position of the moon, the right moment of sunrise. These were not matters of curiosity, but of harmony. And the Vedic calendar was astonishingly precise. Based on lunar months, it also adjusted for solar years. Intercalary months, leap months, were added when needed to realign seasons. This system, refined over millennia, remains foundational in Indian timekeeping today. Observatories arose not as machines of science, but as extensions of the body and spirit. In later centuries, monumental instruments, like those at Jantar Mantar, used shadows and stone to trace planetary motion, solstices, and equinoxes. These were temples of time. But long before stone and brass, observation began with breath. The seers watched stars as one might listen to a mantra, attentively, lovingly, surrendering to rhythm. They mapped 27 lunar mansions, nakshatras, each tied to specific qualities, myths, and deities. These star groups divided the moon's journey across the sky, offering a detailed structure for astrological and ritual practice. Nakshatras were not mere backdrops. They were alive. Ashwini, ruled by twin horsemen, marked speed and healing. Rohini, beloved of the moon, shimmered with beauty and fertility. Ardra, stormy and intense, carried transformation. And from these patterns, a language emerged, a way of interpreting time's flavour. A moment under Mula was different than one under Punarvasu. Time itself became textured, personal, potent. The ancient Indians did not ask merely, "What is this star?" but "What does this moment mean?" They read the sky as one reads poetry, not for facts, but for resonance. The Mahabharata and the Ramayana, epic poems spanning ages, are filled with celestial references. Eclipses, alignments, comets. They frame turning points in the tales. When the moon darkens, destinies shift. When Mars rises red, war looms. These weren't just dramatic flourishes. They reflected a worldview where the cosmic and the human mirrored one another. What happened above echoed below. Eclipses, in particular, held deep meaning. They were not feared blindly, but respected. Myth told of the demon Rahu, who tried to steal the nectar of immortality. Caught by the gods, he was beheaded, but his head lived on. Now, Rahu swallows the sun or moon, causing eclipse, but only for a moment. Chanting, bathing, fasting, these were ways to honor the disruption, to realign, to return to clarity. And in that return, there was always celebration. The sky, after shadow, returned to light. Festivals like Diwali, Holi, and Makar Sankranti are anchored to celestial cycles. Diwali marks the darkest night, lit with lamps as the moon begins to wax. Holi celebrates the spring full moon. Makar Sankranti honors the sun's transition northward. Each feast, each fire, echoes a celestial movement. Even temples mirror the sky, built along meridians, aligned to solstices. Their sanctums light up only on certain days, when the sun touches a specific spot, illuminating deity and devotee alike. These were not accidents. They were devotion, etched in architecture. And in the depths of these temples, the chant of Om rose, vibrating with the frequency of the universe. A reminder that everything, from star to soul, sings. The Vedas were not manuals, but mirrors. They reflected a vision where the sacred was not hidden. It was everywhere, especially above. In every sunrise was a hymn. In every eclipse, a parable. The sky was a teaching, and teachings became traditions. As Indian civilization expanded, so too did its cosmology. The Puranas, rich with myth and metaphor, layered the heavens with stories of Vishnu striding the cosmos, of Shiva as cosmic dancer, of Brahma seated on a lotus blooming from Vishnu's navel. Each image encoded the universe, time, and the self. In these tales, the universe had cycles, yugas, vast epochs of rising and falling virtue. These were not linear progressions, but cosmic breaths. Creation, preservation, dissolution, and rebirth. Even time, in Indian cosmology, was not fixed. It flowed, curved, looped. One day of Brahma, the creator god, was said to last over 4 billion years, and a single breath of Vishnu spanned countless worlds. The numbers were not meant to be grasped, but felt, to expand the mind, stretch the heart, dissolve the ego. In this grand timescale, the stars served not just as guides, but as reminders of scale, of patience, of the infinite within and without. The great scholar Aryabhata, in the 5th century CE, calculated planetary motions with remarkable precision. He described the rotation of the Earth, the eclipses of sun and moon, and sidereal periods. Centuries before telescopes, he mapped the sky with mathematics and devotion. Later, Varahamihira and Bhaskara expanded this legacy. They wrote treatises blending astronomy, astrology, and weather prediction. Science was never divorced from spirit. It was a sacred inquiry. In the schools of Nalanda and Ujjain, students studied the stars as part of becoming whole. To know the sky was to understand the self, the seasons, and the sacred. Calendars guided both ritual and daily life. Marriage dates, harvest times, temple openings, all aligned with lunar and solar rhythms. Astrologers read birth charts to find harmony, not fate. The goal was not to predict, but to align. And so, under the vastness of the Indian sky, humanity walked not as conqueror, but as participant. Life was a ritual, time was a hymn, and the stars, They were the syllables of a divine song. In villages across India, people still rise with the stars. They light lamps at dawn, chant mantras during eclipses, consult calendars written in the language of the sky. In sacred forests and crowded cities, beneath neon and starlight, the rhythm persists. The Panchang, a traditional almanac, remains a trusted guide. It lists tithis, nakshatras, planetary transits, lunar phases. Farmers, priests, and families consult it with care, blending ancient wisdom with modern life. Astrologers continue to cast horoscopes, not as predictions of fate, but as tools for insight. A chart is a mirror, a way to understand tendencies, moments of growth, periods of rest. It is not about fear, it is about awareness. And awareness is sacred, because to look up at the stars is still to be humbled, still to be awakened, still to feel that pull, not to escape Earth, but to return to something older, something vast, something true. That truth is not always spoken, but it is felt, in the heart, in breath, in silence beneath the stars. India's sky remains full of meaning, and the stories, the chants, the calculations, they are all echoes of the cosmic egg, of sound made light, of a universe that began with a breath and never stopped singing. The sky in India was not only sacred, it was social. It united people across castes and regions. A festival like Navaratri, timed by the lunar cycle, might mean fasting for one family, dancing for another, and storytelling for yet another. But all were joined beneath the same moon, under the same constellations. Even marriage rituals carried celestial codes. The most auspicious moments for union were chosen based on planetary alignments and lunar positions. A wedding became more than a celebration. It was a harmonizing of two lives with the cosmos. Children, too, were named in relation to the stars. Based on the nakshatra of their birth, certain syllables were recommended. A name, then, was not arbitrary. It was a song tuned to time. This personalization of the cosmos, this belief that the universe speaks to the individual, imbued life with intimacy. The stars weren't distant, they were involved, and this intimacy extended into healing. Ayurveda, the ancient system of medicine, often aligned treatment with celestial patterns. Certain herbs were gathered on specific lunar days. Oils were prepared under full moons. The stars were consulted, not for miracles, but for resonance. Alignment of body, mind, and sky. In all things, there was this principle. The micro reflects the macro. The body mirrors the universe. The breath mirrors the wind. The pulse echoes the stars. This vision, holistic and humbling, invited not mastery, but harmony. And harmony was not passive. It required attention, presence, a willingness to live in rhythm with the seasons, with the phases of the moon, with the subtle pull of planets unseen. To wake before sunrise was not just discipline, it was alignment with Brahma Muhurta, the time of inspiration. To sleep under moonlight was not indulgence, it was restoration under Chandra's gaze. The architecture of the sky became the architecture of the soul. In every mantra, a resonance. In every star, a memory. In every festival, a renewal. And through it all, a profound sense that nothing, no moment, no movement, was without meaning. Ancient India's heavens were not cold or abstract. They were alive, interconnected, expressive, and they still are. When a grandmother looks up and recites a sloka, when a temple bell rings at dusk, when a child sees the moon and is told a story, the tradition lives on. It doesn't need telescopes, just eyes, just ears, just a heart tuned to the ancient song still echoing above us. A song that began with Om and has never ceased. In ancient China, the sky was not distant. It was immediate. It was order. It was rhythm. And above all, it was a mirror of the earth. The cosmos wasn't simply watched. It was woven into every thread of society. From the alignment of palaces to the timing of harvests, the stars dictated harmony. And harmony was everything. At the heart of Chinese cosmology was Tian, the heaven. Not a place of gods, but a principle. An impersonal, enduring order that governed all things. Tian was not worshipped with fear, but respected with reverence. It was the source of seasons, fate, justice, and legitimacy. The emperor ruled not by blood alone, but through the mandate of heaven. Tianming. If the sky showed distress, eclipses, floods, droughts, it was believed heaven was withdrawing its favor. The stars became political. The cosmos shaped power. And so, astronomers were not mere scholars. They were guardians of the realm's balance. They watched the heavens for signs. A comet might mean rebellion. An eclipse could signal loss. Their role was vital, sacred, sometimes even dangerous. They built towers, instruments, calendars. They divided the sky into palaces, regions, and animal zones. But they also saw patterns that moved beyond observation, patterns of energy, of transformation, of balance. The universe, they believed, was structured by qi, vital breath, cosmic energy, flowing through all things. Stars had qi. Mountains had qi. People, of course, had qi. And when all flowed well, there was harmony. When it was blocked, there was discord. This understanding gave rise to yin and yang, the twin forces of dark and light, rest and motion, feminine and masculine. Not opposites, but complements. Together, they formed a cycle. Day becomes night, winter becomes spring, stillness becomes action. And above them both moved the 5 phases: wuxing, wood, fire, earth, metal, water. These were not just materials, but states of change, aspects of time, principles of nature and direction. Planets were aligned with these phases. Jupiter was wood, Mars, fire, Saturn, earth, Venus, metal, Mercury, water. Their movements weren't random. They were rhythms in the cosmic dance. And each rhythm had meaning. Celestial events were timed and interpreted through these lenses. A red star flaring in the east might not just be Mars. It might be fire growing strong. It might signal heat, aggression, passion, or imbalance if it came at the wrong season. They divided the sky into 28 lunar mansions, Xiu, each with a symbolic animal, a seasonal association, and a place in the cosmic cycle. These weren't just constellations. They were guides, guardians, gateways of influence. The sky was also home to powerful symbols: the azure dragon of the east, the white tiger of the west, the vermilion bird of the south, and the black tortoise of the north. These weren't just creatures. They were manifestations of direction, season, and elemental energy. The dragon, in particular, held special meaning. It was a creature of the heavens, coiling and uncoiling across the sky. Comets were sometimes called broom stars, sweeping the sky like a dragon's tail, unpredictable, potent, full of omen. Dragons weren't feared, they were revered. They symbolized transformation, weather, authority. The emperor himself was said to be descended from the dragon, and so celestial dragons were watched with awe. This blending of astronomy and symbolism was reflected in Chinese star maps, some of the oldest and most detailed in the world. The Dunhuang star chart, painted over 1,000 years ago, shows stars not only with names, but with meaning. Each had a role in the cosmic play. But meaning wasn't confined to large events. Even the changing shape of the moon, the halo around the sun, the path of a falling star, each bore insight. The sky was always speaking, and the wise, it was believed, learned to listen. They created calendars that harmonized lunar and solar cycles. Intercalary months kept balance. Festivals, farming, travel, even medicine followed the rhythms of heaven. The Chinese lunisolar calendar remains in use today, its roots deep, its structure cosmic. New Year begins not on a fixed date, but with the second new moon after the winter solstice. It welcomes the return of light, the flow of spring, the dance of dragons through streets and skies alike. Every year, an animal and an element shape the tone of time. The year of the metal rat, the year of the water dragon. These are not superstitions. They're cultural metaphors, ancient poetry about the energy of a moment. And poetry was everywhere. The moon inspired more than calendars. It inspired longing. Li Bai wrote of drinking with shadows beneath moonlight. Du Fu described eclipses as moments of silence in the sky. The stars were muses, memory, and metaphor. In Taoism, the sky became even more mystical. The Big Dipper was a gateway. The Milky Way, a river of spirit. The pole star, an axis of stillness. Meditation, breathwork, alchemy. All were ways to tune one's qi with that of the heavens. To be in harmony with the Tao was to float with the stars, to act without force, to live with the seasons, to become like water, like wind, like light, moving gently through the world. This vision did not seek control, but resonance. In the imperial courts, the role of the celestial observer was enshrined in duty. Every morning, reports were delivered from the observatory. Every anomaly was noted. The emperor's advisors read the sky as one might read an ancient script, carefully, respectfully, with gravity. These sky watchers weren't isolated scholars. They were connected to the flow of governance. If two suns were seen, perhaps a halo or rare refraction, it was considered urgent. Advisories were sent. Offerings were made. Adjustments in ritual were called for. The sky was policy, and these policies extended to the design of cities. The Forbidden City in Beijing, for example, is aligned with celestial north. Its architecture mirrors the cosmic order, its gates and halls echoing star maps and constellations. The emperor sat at the center, symbolic of the pole star, fixed, still, a reference point for the swirling heavens. Such symbolism was not metaphor. It was intent, a reminder that rule must reflect harmony, that leadership must align with heaven. In folk traditions, the stars were no less meaningful. Farmers read constellations to know when to plant, when to harvest, when to rest. Lunar phases guided daily tasks. Fishermen watched the moon and tides as carefully as they watched the wind. Stories, too, wove through the night. The tale of the weaver girl and the cowherd. Two lovers, separated by the Milky Way, reunited once a year by a bridge of magpies, offered not just romance, but rhythm. Their reunion marked the Chishi festival, a reminder that even longing has its season. Children heard of moon rabbits pounding elixirs, of immortal maidens dancing in light. These stories, passed from parent to child, carried comfort. A sense that the night was not dark, but alive. Not empty, but watching. In traditional medicine, too, the heavens played a role. Ancient Chinese physicians believed that the flow of qi within the body mirrored the flow of qi in the sky. Health was a matter of seasonal harmony. Winter called for rest. Spring, renewal. Illness, they said, arose when internal rhythms fell out of sync with heaven. And so, treatments followed cycles. Certain herbs were picked when the moon was full. Acupuncture points were chosen in alignment with solar terms. The patient was not a case, but a cosmos. This integration of star and body, of breath and moon, reflected a worldview of deep unity. Everything was connected, and every connection was an invitation to awareness, to reverence, to care. Even death was viewed through a celestial lens. Burial dates were chosen based on astrology. Tombs were oriented to specific stars. The soul's journey, it was believed, could be helped or hindered by the sky's condition. Heaven opened paths, or closed them. Dynasties fell, philosophies shifted, but this skyward gaze endured, and it still does. Today, fireworks mark the new year. Lanterns rise during the Mid-Autumn Festival. Children still trace the Big Dipper. And when elders offer prayers to ancestors, they often face the stars. Not because the stars demand it, but because the stars remember. And perhaps, when we pause, just for a moment, and feel that hush in the night sky, we remember too. The oldest observatories, some dating back over 2 millennia, still stand as silent witnesses to this heritage. At Dengfeng, near the foot of sacred Mount Song, stone and shadow once measured solstice and equinox. Not with glass lenses or metal gears, but with earth, angle, and sky. Here, time was not counted. It was revealed. And in that revelation, the sages saw something greater than prediction. They saw relationship, a bond between the human and the celestial, between action and outcome, between respect and renewal. This spirit flowed into art, into music, into daily life. Musicians tuned their instruments not just to scales, but to solar terms. The qin, a classical Chinese zither, was once played to align breath with season, melody with sky. Each note a gesture of harmony. Painters placed the moon not only for light, but for feeling. A single white circle above a fisherman, a temple, a crane. It wasn't just background. It was presence, stillness, reflection. And poets, always poets, shaped their verses to honor these rhythms. A falling leaf wasn't only autumn. It was time itself whispering farewell. A bright moon wasn't just beautiful. It was shared, across distance, across absence. We gaze at the same moon, they wrote, though we are apart. That idea, that the sky unites, may be the most enduring gift of China's ancient cosmic view. Not in conquest, not in domination, but in quiet companionship. The stars don't divide, they connect. And in that connection, harmony is born. Long before the sky was mapped with math, it was felt with the soul. And yet, in every corner of the ancient world, people began to do something quietly revolutionary. They started to count, to track, to measure, not to tame the stars, but to understand their rhythm. They became the first astronomers. These early observers didn't sit in laboratories. They sat on mountaintops, in open fields, beside rivers. They watched, patiently, night after night. And they began to see patterns, not just in the stars, but in time. The moon's phases, the sun's angle, the shifting of constellations. They noticed when stars returned to the same point in the sky, when shadows lengthened, when certain birds flew with certain stars. These were not coincidences, they were signs. From these signs came calendars, and the calendar, more than any invention, connected sky to society. It turned the infinite into the intimate. It gave structure to seasons, to rituals, to memory. In Mesopotamia, lunar months gave rise to some of the earliest recorded calendars. New moons marked beginnings. Full moons lit festivals. They knew the year was longer than 12 months, so they added a 13th now and then to stay in sync. In Egypt, the heliacal rising of Sirius signaled the flood of the Nile, a moment of profound renewal. They built their calendar around it, 365 days, divided into 12 months of 30 days, plus 5 feast days. It was practical, poetic, celestial. In Mesoamerica, the Maya tracked solar and lunar cycles with breathtaking precision. They mapped Venus's motion across the sky, down to the day. Their calendars wove together ritual and astronomy, 260-day ceremonial cycles paired with 365-day solar years. Time itself became sacred. In ancient India, complex lunisolar calendars emerged, adjusted for the subtle dance between moon and sun. Intercalary months ensured harmony. Rituals followed sky. Astrology and astronomy moved as one. Across China, the observation of solstices and equinoxes shaped imperial time. Farmers' calendars followed 24 solar terms, markers of wind, rain, frost, harvest. These terms remain in use even today, guiding tradition and daily life alike. These were not just tools, they were philosophies, reflections of how each culture viewed time, life, and the cosmos. Some saw time as a line, others a cycle. Some marked it with gods, others with elements, others with sacred numbers. But all agreed, time flowed from the heavens, and the heavens were generous with their patterns. The constellations became companions, guides, stories. In the northern hemisphere, the same shapes were named again and again, because they truly stood out. Orion, the Pleiades, the Bear. But each culture told their own tales. To the Greeks, Orion was a hunter. To the Egyptians, perhaps Osiris. To the Lakota, a spiritual path. The shape was the same. The meaning, unique. The Pleiades, a tight cluster of stars, inspired myths across continents. 7 sisters in Greece. 7 maidens in Japan. Subaru. In Australia, they were chased by Orion. In the Americas, they danced in ceremony. the same stars, the same awe. People across the globe grouped stars, not because they had to, but because they loved to. It was instinct, art, a way to make the cosmos human. And yet, these stories didn't stop at metaphor. They served as markers. When the Pleiades rose before dawn, it signaled the new year in many cultures. When Orion vanished, it meant a shift in the seasons. When certain stars crossed the zenith, it was time to sow, or to harvest, or to prepare. It was beneath this celestial cathedral that the first observatories rose, not always as buildings, but as aligned stones, as sightlines carved into the earth. Stonehenge in Britain, Nabta Playa in Africa, Chaco Canyon in the Americas, each aligned with solstices, with lunar cycles, with stellar risings. These were not random arrangements. They were declarations. They said, "We are watching. We are listening." And what they heard was rhythm. The ancients did not separate science from spirit. To track a star was to trace the breath of the divine. To follow the moon was to honor the pulse of the earth. The first astronomers were also priests, healers, keepers of memory. Their tools were humble: sticks in the sand, lines on rock, shadows on the ground. But their insights were profound. They knew the moon returned every 29.5 days, that eclipses followed cycles, that Venus disappeared and reappeared on schedule. They knew enough to plant, enough to gather, enough to build monuments that still, today, capture the sun exactly, on that one morning, in that one shaft of stone. And they passed this knowledge forward, sometimes in song, sometimes in stone, sometimes in stories too layered for outsiders to see, but inside them, deep sky logic. The Inca built Cusco in the shape of a puma. The city's lines pointed to solstice sunrises, to sacred mountains, to stars. In Polynesia, navigators memorized star paths and wind patterns. They could sail for weeks using nothing but sky and sea. In Europe, megaliths aligned with the moon's complex 18.6-year cycle. In Africa, the Dogon spoke of stars invisible to the eye. In the Middle East, ziggurats rose like stairways to the stars. Let me now calculate the updated word count before continuing. These early astronomers didn't just mark time, they shaped identity. The stars became anchors in the great unknown. In the shifting of life, in the rise and fall of kingdoms, the sky remained. And that constancy gave hope. When a child was born under a certain star, it was remembered. When a tribe moved, they followed the constellations they knew. When storms threatened, they read the clouds by the way they darkened familiar skies. In every epoch, the stars offered reassurance. They came back. They followed patterns. They told us, change is natural, but so is return. Eventually, writing emerged, and sky knowledge moved from memory to record. Clay tablets in Mesopotamia charted Venus and Jupiter. Bamboo strips in China mapped eclipses and comets. Sanskrit texts in India recorded rising times of stars. Mayan codices preserved solar calculations with staggering precision. And yet, through it all, the sky was not a problem to solve. It was a companion to walk with. Even as instruments advanced, from the gnomon to the astrolabe, from the quadrant to the armillary sphere, the tone of study remained one of reverence. The further they reached, the more they saw how small they were. but never unimportant. They understood that to observe the stars was to become a thread in something vast. A pattern, perhaps. A story. And in that story, humanity found its rhythm. The ancient sky was not just a ceiling. It was a teacher, a clock, a choir, a canvas on which every civilization painted its understanding of life, time, and eternity. And across all the early cultures, Mesopotamian, Egyptian, Indian, Chinese, Greek, Andean, Polynesian, despite distance, despite difference, one truth emerges. They all looked up. They all asked the same questions. Where did we come from? What is our place? What comes next? And in asking, they reached towards something larger. They didn't just measure time. They shaped it. They didn't just name stars. They befriended them. They didn't just mark the heavens. They listened to them. That listening continues today. Though we have clocks in our pockets and satellites above our heads, something ancient stirs when we see a full moon rise. When we stand beneath the stars in silence. When we feel the cold sweep of air under Orion's belt. We remember. We remember that we come from stargazers, from watchers, from wanderers, and that the sky, still, is telling its story. All we have to do is keep looking up. When people first began to reason about the sky, they didn't abandon myth. They reached for more precise language, but their eyes still looked up in wonder. In ancient Greece, the sky remained a sacred space, filled with gods and riddles. But gradually, questions began to shift. Instead of asking who controlled the heavens, some started asking how they moved, and why. Yet even the earliest Greek thinkers framed their science in myth. The stars were still divine, the cosmos still a living being. What changed was the desire to explain that divinity in rational terms. Hesiod spoke of chaos giving birth to Gaia and Uranus, earth and sky. From their union came the Titans, and from them the gods. But in his lines, we hear echoes of structure, generations, hierarchies, a story unfolding like a pattern. Homer's sky was alive with agency. Zeus hurled thunderbolts from high Olympus. The sun was Helios, driving a golden chariot. Dawn had rosy fingers. Night wore a star-spangled robe. These weren't metaphors to the Greeks. They were truths, sacred, seen, and sung. But slowly, another truth crept in. Thales of Miletus, living around 600 BCE, proposed that the world might be knowable through observation. He watched the stars not to read omens, but to find patterns. He predicted an eclipse, and with that, something subtle shifted. Anaximander, his student, imagined Earth floating freely in space, unsupported by pillars or gods. He described a kind of balance, a natural order. He even speculated on infinity, on cycles without end. Anaximenes followed, suggesting air as the fundamental substance. Everything, he thought, condensed or expanded from it. The stars, he said, might be fiery breaths carried on wind. It was not science as we know it, but it was wonder turning toward reason. These thinkers didn't reject the sacred. They sought to understand it differently. They believed in a cosmos in Greek, meaning not just the universe, but order, harmony, beauty, a universe that could be known. Pythagoras took this further. He heard music in the stars. Not literal sound, but a harmony, mathematical, divine. He taught that the planets moved in spheres, each emitting a note. Together, they made the music of the cosmos. To Pythagoreans, numbers weren't just tools, they were truths. The stars moved not randomly, but with purpose, with ratio, with meaning. It was a mystical view, but also a mathematical one. And as mathematics deepened, so did questions. Parmenides claimed that change was illusion, that reality was one, unshifting, eternal. Heraclitus, on the other hand, said change was the only constant. You cannot step into the same river twice, he wrote. These views shaped how thinkers viewed time, motion, and the stars. Empedocles proposed 4 elements: earth, water, air, fire, and 2 forces: love and strife. A cosmic cycle of attraction and separation. Even celestial bodies, he believed, followed these dynamics. Leucippus and Democritus imagined atoms, tiny, indivisible particles moving in a void. They said everything, even stars, was built from these bits. The heavens, they suggested, were not a separate realm. They were made of the same stuff as us. It was radical, daring, but the sacred lingered. It never left. Even as philosophy grew, temples remained. Myths were still told. Festivals still honored gods who moved in arcs across the sky. What changed most was the idea that reason could reveal order, that the stars, though divine, followed laws, that behind the beauty there was a structure waiting to be uncovered. And with that, a new kind of observer was born. This new observer didn't replace the poet or the priest, but stood beside them, watching, measuring, asking not just what does this mean, but how does this work? And from that, a revolution in thought began. By the 5th century BCE, Greeks were building more than myths. They were building models, trying to explain the movements of the heavens in terms of circles, spheres, and symmetry. Eudoxus of Cnidus imagined a system of nested spheres. Each planet moved on its own sphere, embedded in larger ones. These turned together, like gears in a cosmic machine. His aim was to preserve the elegance of circular motion, the apparent wandering of the planets, and the harmony of the sky. It was geometry applied to the divine. Eudoxus's ideas influenced Aristotle, who took these spheres and gave them purpose. To him, the universe was a series of concentric shells, with Earth at the centre. Each sphere was moved by the one outside it, all the way to the prime mover, the source of all motion. Aristotle's cosmos was closed, finite, perfect. Beyond the stars, he said, there was no space, no time, only the divine. But already, cracks were appearing in the perfection. Observers noticed that planets didn't move in perfect circles. They looped. They wandered. They retrograded, moving backward before resuming forward motion. This dance puzzled many. Some, like Heraclides Ponticus, proposed that Earth itself might be moving, that perhaps the stars were still, and it was the Earth that turned. A daring thought, whispered, then buried. Others clung to epicycles, circles upon circles, added to preserve the appearance of circular motion. The model grew more complex, less elegant, but the search for explanation endured. And through it all, the heavens continued to inspire. The mystery deepened with every answer. By the time of Aristarchus of Samos, bold new ideas emerged. He suggested that the Earth orbited the Sun, not the other way around, that the stars were far away, scattered across a vast, still darkness. Few listened. The idea was too radical, too dissonant with what the senses claimed and what tradition held. Earth, after all, felt stable. The heavens turned each night. The gods had always looked down, not around. But Aristarchus planted a seed. Meanwhile, Eratosthenes, with a stick, a shadow, and a keen mind, measured the Earth's circumference with surprising accuracy. He proved that the Earth was not just a point, but a globe, a body in space, a part of something larger. These thinkers stood on a bridge between myth and method. They did not laugh at the gods. They did not discard wonder. But they sought to know the sky with reason, to walk alongside awe with open eyes. The library at Alexandria became a sanctuary for such thought. Scrolls filled with starlight, charts inked with imagination. Here, sky watchers and philosophers gathered to study the heavens as a grand, knowable system. They built armillary spheres, metal models of the cosmos. They calculated lengths of years, of seasons, of eclipses. They debated theories, corrected errors, and passed knowledge across generations. Yet even then, uncertainty remained, because the stars are not clocks. They are mysteries in motion. Even with observation and calculation, the heavens resisted easy answers. For every pattern seen, another slipped beyond reach. Some stars wandered, others blinked out, only to return months later. The moon shifted subtly. The sun wobbled through the year. And so, the first philosophers of the sky lived with tension, between clarity and enigma, between model and mystery. They didn't resolve it. They danced with it. They kept refining ideas. The heavens must move in circles, they thought, because the circle is perfect, and perfection, surely, ruled the stars. This belief shaped generations. For centuries, the circle reigned, not because it was observed, but because it was ideal. And ideals held power. But in the streets, under the open sky, shepherds and sailors trusted what they saw. Stars to guide journeys, moons to mark tides. They charted without theory, mapped without epicycles. Their astronomy was not pure, but it worked. Science grew from both sides, theory and practice, from armillary spheres and merchant sails, from scrolls and shadow, from temple roofs and olive groves. Each added a thread. Each thread wove a greater tapestry, and that tapestry wrapped around the world, softening fear, illuminating darkness, offering not certainty, but companionship. As Greek philosophy matured, its legacy stretched far beyond its birthplace. Ideas travelled with traders, with sailors, with soldiers and scribes. They reached the shores of Egypt, the mountains of Persia, the crossroads of Asia. And everywhere they went, they mixed with older knowledge, older skies. No idea stayed pure, and none needed to. In Alexandria, Greek thought met Egyptian tradition. Babylonian sky-watching blended with Mediterranean geometry. And from that fusion emerged a worldview both mathematical and mystical, rational and radiant. The cosmos became a layered place, filled with crystalline spheres, musical intervals, nested geometries. To study the heavens was to draw nearer to truth, not just scientific, but spiritual. And at the center of it all, still, was Earth. small, unmoving, watched. But ideas do not sleep, and questions never end. Some thinkers wondered, what if motion was relative? What if the center was not fixed? What if light took time to travel? What if stars had depth? They had no tools to prove it, only minds willing to wonder. And that, perhaps, was their greatest gift. They gave us a sky not to conquer, but to contemplate. A universe drawn with circles, sung in numbers, dreamed in harmony. A universe that was alive, not just with motion, but with meaning. This legacy didn't end with their lifetimes. It echoed through Rome, through Byzantium, through the scholars of the Islamic world who preserved and expanded their work. It reached the Renaissance, where questions asked on Greek shores would bloom again in the hands of Copernicus, Kepler, and Galileo. But that comes later. For now, we sit with the early thinkers. We sit beside Thales under a dark sky, counting stars. With Anaximander, imagining an infinite cosmos. With Pythagoras, listening for music in the silence. With Heraclides, whispering that maybe, just maybe, Earth turns. They didn't have telescopes, but they had eyes. They didn't have spacecraft, but they had wonder. And in that wonder, they gave birth to a new kind of myth. A myth made of questions, of models, of searching. Not to replace the gods, but to reach toward the same mystery. The heavens hadn't changed, only how we listened. Among the thinkers who shaped how we see the cosmos, few stand taller than Plato and Aristotle. To them, the heavens were not just beautiful, they were essential. They were not distant lights, but the very framework of existence. And they believed, deeply, that the sky could teach us something about the soul. Plato, writing in the 4th century BCE, taught that the visible world was only a shadow, a reflection of a deeper, invisible realm. A realm of perfect forms, unchanging, eternal. In that higher world, there existed the perfect circle, the perfect number, the perfect star. To understand the heavens, then, was to remember, to recall truths we already carried in our souls. Watching the stars could help us awaken to what we had forgotten. Plato saw the soul as a charioteer, struggling to guide two horses, one noble, one wild, through the heavens. And he believed the soul once travelled with the stars, before being born into the body. So when he looked up, he wasn't seeking data. He was seeking return. In his dialogue Timaeus, Plato offered a vision of cosmic creation. A divine craftsman, the demiurge, shaped the world out of chaos, using mathematics and harmony as his tools. The world's soul, he said, was born of geometric proportion. The stars were living gods. And time itself began when the planets began to move. This wasn't metaphor. This was physics for Plato. The planets moved in circles because circles were perfect. Their motions were not random, but expressions of eternal truths. Each orbit, each rhythm, reflected something higher. Plato's influence was immense, but it was Aristotle, his student, who gave the cosmos its enduring shape. Aristotle believed that knowledge came not from remembering, but from observing, from watching the world and reasoning through it. He trusted the senses more than his teacher did. He taught that everything in the universe had a natural place. Earth at the center, water, air, and fire rising above in layered order, and beyond them, the heavens. There, a fifth element ruled: ether. Unlike the earthly elements, ether was unchanging, perfect. It filled the space beyond the moon and made up the stars and planets. The heavens, to Aristotle, were not just divine. They were fundamentally different from Earth, and they moved not in chaos, but in perfect circles. He described a universe of concentric spheres, each planet embedded in a transparent shell, turning slowly around Earth. The stars fixed to the outermost sphere, which moved them all. This model was more than physics. It was philosophy. The prime mover at the edge of the cosmos was pure thought, unmoving but causing all motion by being the final goal of all things, a kind of divine gravity, drawing everything toward purpose. It was elegant, powerful, and it lasted for centuries. For generations, this Aristotelian cosmos offered not just structure, but meaning. It gave the universe a place for everything, and everything a place. Earth, imperfect and ever-changing, sat in the center. Around it, the heavens moved with grace, constant and eternal. And for many, this made sense. The moon waxed and waned, but always returned. The stars circled predictably. The planets danced with regularity, if not simplicity. It felt right. It felt ordered. It felt divine. And yet, the model needed help. Even with spheres stacked upon spheres, the planets didn't quite fit. They lingered too long in some constellations. They reversed direction. They sped up, slowed down. The perfection of circles could not fully explain their behavior. So scholars refined the system. They added epicycles, small circles upon the main ones. They tilted spheres. They recalibrated speeds. Every adjustment preserved the ideal of circles and the certainty of Earth's stillness. But beneath these tweaks was a growing tension. The model was beautiful, but not entirely accurate. Still, it endured, not just because it worked well enough, but because it resonated with philosophy, with religion, with intuition. It echoed the human need for structure, for purpose. In the world shaped by Plato and Aristotle, to study the heavens was to reflect on perfection itself. This wasn't only an academic pursuit, it was moral. To understand the ordered motion of the stars was to bring order to the soul. To live in harmony with the cosmos was to live wisely. Schools emerged that followed these teachings, blending sky with ethics, astronomy with virtue. The Stoics believed that the universe was a rational being, filled with logos, a divine logic flowing through all things. Fate, they said, was the unfolding of this logic. The stars didn't cause events, they revealed the order within them. For them, astrology wasn't superstition, it was a science of alignment. The Neoplatonists took this even further. They saw the cosmos as a ladder of light, each sphere closer to the divine. Meditation, music, contemplation of the heavens, all were ways of returning to that source. And in this worldview, the spheres themselves sang, not with sound, but with resonance, a harmony of motions, a music of the stars. Even when it could not be heard, it could be felt. To walk beneath the night sky, for them, was not passive observation. It was communion, a sacred remembering. Even outside the academies, the influence of Plato and Aristotle shaped how the world was built. Temples and theatres aligned with solstices. Cities were laid out according to celestial geometry, not just for beauty, but to reflect the order of the heavens. Architecture became a kind of astronomy in stone. Time itself was divided by celestial cues. the length of the day, the phase of the moon, the rhythm of stars. Calendars were not merely tools, they were philosophies, reflections of cosmic cycles applied to earthly life. When people prayed, they looked upward. When they planned, they watched the sky. And when they wondered, they asked not just where, but why. Why do the stars return? Why are the motions so regular? Why does the universe feel so alive? The answers differed, but the impulse was the same. To look for harmony, to look for meaning, to find in the movement of the cosmos a mirror of the mind. And even as cracks began to show in the models, as observations outpaced the theories, the longing for a structured, meaningful sky persisted. Because even a flawed map, if beautiful enough, can still point toward truth. As the centuries passed, the model of concentric spheres became more than theory. It became tradition. It was taught in schools, engraved in books, painted on ceilings. The nested spheres of the cosmos became part of the culture's imagination, and they were beautiful. Each sphere moved with gentle precision. Each planet, cradled in a glassy shell, moved in perfect harmony. The whole universe turned like a divine clockwork, predictable, ordered, serene. This vision brought comfort. In a world filled with change and uncertainty, the stars offered something stable, something above. And yet, there were always questions. Some wondered if the spheres were real, solid, crystalline, vast. Others saw them as metaphor, as useful fictions to explain the motions they observed. But all agreed on one thing: the heavens were meaningful. To chart the sky was to approach the divine. The influence of this idea would stretch far into the future. It would shape the models of Ptolemy. It would be translated into Arabic and Latin. It would echo in cathedrals and cathedrals of thought. It would remain until the day someone dared to ask, what if Earth is not the center? That question, so simple, so radical, would come centuries later. But its seeds were here, in the sky of Plato and Aristotle, in the tension between what was observed and what was believed, in the space between wonder and reason. For now, the spheres held firm. They spun above cathedrals, above villages, above fields where shepherds still pointed at the moon. They turned above classrooms where students copied diagrams with careful hands. They whispered a promise that everything had a reason, a rhythm, a place. And so people lived by them. Farmers planted by lunar cycles, sailors steered by the stars, builders marked temples with solstices, poets composed hymns to constellations, children learned to count by watching phases of the moon. In every part of life, the heavens were present, and they did not merely govern, they inspired. They taught patience, they taught pattern, they taught humility. For if the stars could be known, perhaps so could we. And in that knowing, they believed there was peace, not the peace of stillness, but the peace of understanding, of seeing oneself reflected in the arc of the stars, in the turn of the seasons, in the geometry of the sky. Plato and Aristotle gave the cosmos a voice that would echo through time. Their models would be challenged, revised, eventually replaced. But their influence on science, on philosophy, on culture remained. They invited us to listen to the sky, not as noise, but as music. To look upward, not in fear, but in inquiry. To imagine that beyond the chaos of life, there might be an order, a hidden symmetry waiting to be seen. And whether it was true or not, that belief shaped the way people lived for 2,000 years. It shaped the architecture of thought. It taught us to seek patterns, to love knowledge, to respect beauty, to believe that the stars had something to say. And maybe they still do. Even now, when we lie in a field, or peer through a telescope, or stand in a quiet street with stars overhead, we inherit something from those early minds. From Plato's vision of eternal forms, from Aristotle's nested spheres, from their courage to wonder and to think. Let me now calculate the final word count. In the shimmering crossroads of cultures known as Alexandria, the sky met the scroll. Here, under the domes of knowledge, and between the walls of the greatest library of the ancient world, something remarkable happened. Astronomy became precision. Philosophy had imagined the heavens. Religion had sanctified them. Myth had filled them with stories. But Alexandria sought to measure them, to draw maps, to predict patterns, to find order, not just in poetry, but in numbers. And so the work began. The city itself was a wonder. Greek streets wrapped around Egyptian temples. Markets buzzed in many languages. Ships arrived from every known port, carrying spices, scholars, scrolls. And at its center stood the great library, a beacon of knowledge where any who hungered for learning were welcomed. Here came Hipparchus of Nicaea, not for glory, not for myth, but for accuracy. He watched the sky from Rhodes, far from Alexandria, but his work would reach the city's scholars and shape its memory. He brought with him a new method: compare. Compare star charts, compare lunar eclipses, compare ancient observations from Babylon with what the eye sees now. From those comparisons, he revealed a hidden motion, the precession of the equinoxes, a subtle, slow shift in the position of the stars over millennia, caused by the wobble of Earth's axis. No myth explained it. No god demanded it. Only patience could find it. Only numbers could prove it. Hipparchus created the first known star catalogue, over 1,000 stars, arranged by brightness, positioned by coordinates. He divided the circle into 360 degrees. He helped invent trigonometry. And though many of his works are lost, their echoes survived. In the writings of a man who would become the authority on the cosmos for more than 1,000 years. Claudius Ptolemy. Living in Alexandria in the 2nd century CE, Ptolemy took the knowledge of Hipparchus, of Babylon, of Greece, and built a model so influential it would shape the structure of the heavens until the dawn of modern science. His work, the Almagest, was both elegant and complex. It described a geocentric universe, Earth at the center, the sun and planets orbiting in epicycles, small circles on larger circular paths. It was not perfect, but it worked. It allowed accurate predictions of planetary positions. It matched observation with calculation, and it fit neatly with philosophical ideas of symmetry, hierarchy, and celestial perfection. Ptolemy didn't claim this was reality. He claimed it was useful, a model, a means. But in time, it became dogma. Universities taught it. Churches defended it. Artists painted it into ceilings. the Ptolemaic cosmos became not just science, but truth. Still, Ptolemy's genius was not in blind faith, but in method. He refined planetary tables. He used geometrical reasoning to describe orbits. He defined a system of epicycles and deferents, inclinations and equants, all tools to match the sky's apparent motion with mathematical clarity. He also wrote the Tetrabiblos, a treatise on astrology, linking the stars to earthly fate, not by magic, but by influence. In his view, the cosmos was a continuum. What happened above echoed below. In Alexandria, such a view made sense. It was a city where boundaries blurred, where East met West, where mathematics met mysticism. And in that blending, a new kind of sky was born. The heavens became not just sacred, but solvable. Yet even as calculations grew more precise, mystery remained. The epicycles worked, but they multiplied. Each correction required another circle. Each observation led to another adjustment. The system became baroque, beautiful, layered, intricate, and fragile. Still, it held. For more than 1,000 years, the Ptolemaic model ruled. It travelled with traders and priests. It entered the universities of Europe. It was translated into Arabic, copied into Latin, commented upon, and preserved. And while its details were debated, its foundation stood firm. Earth at the centre, the stars beyond, the cosmos ordered. But beneath the surface, questions stirred. Some thinkers wondered, what if the model wasn't quite right? What if the calculations, though accurate, masked a deeper truth? What if the centre was somewhere else? Those ideas would wait for Copernicus, for Kepler, for Galileo. But the seeds were planted in Alexandria. There, between scrolls and instruments, observation began to stand beside tradition. Numbers began to speak with their own voice. And through Hipparchus and Ptolemy, that voice began to say, the sky can be known. To understand just how far Alexandria reached, we have to step into the rhythm of its daily life. The library was not simply a collection of scrolls. It was a living, breathing hub of experimentation. Astronomers debated with mathematicians. Philosophers walked beside physicians. Language, science, and spirit wove together. The air carried the scent of papyrus and ink. Knowledge was not static. It was sung, shared, challenged. The museum, part temple, part academy, hosted some of the finest minds of the ancient world. Funded by the state, it offered food and lodging to scholars, freeing them to think, to write, to watch. And above all, they watched the sky. Imagine a rooftop observatory in the heat of an Alexandrian summer night. No artificial light, no city glare, just the stars, sharp and endless, spilling over the sky like salt on black silk. Under such skies, precision became possible. Hipparchus had shown that a patient mind could detect the tiniest shifts, that the sky, though vast, had rules. That motion, so slow as to be invisible, could still be measured, understood, predicted. And Ptolemy took that truth and built a framework that would hold for centuries. He didn't claim perfection. He acknowledged that his epicycles were tools, not reality. His goal wasn't to explain why the heavens moved, but how. To describe the sky's behavior with enough accuracy to be trusted by mariners, calendar makers, and astrologers alike. And that's what made it powerful. It worked. Even when the stars deviated, the model adapted. With enough layers, any deviation could be smoothed. With enough circles, any loop could be explained. But science, like the stars, does not stand still. Within the quiet discipline of measurement, a deeper revolution stirred. For Ptolemy, astronomy was a mirror of earthly life, a layered, elegant structure where reason prevailed. But those who came after him began to sense something else in the numbers. Not just utility, not just method, but contradiction. The stars kept moving, the models kept expanding, the math grew thicker, more tangled, and slowly a question emerged from within the circles. What if these epicycles weren't just a tool? What if they were a mask? A few dared to suggest alternatives. Some whispered of heliocentric ideas, of Earth in motion, of the sun at the center. Such ideas existed in old Greek writings, ignored or suppressed. But in the age of Ptolemy, they could not take root. The weight of tradition was too great, the elegance of the model too comforting, and above all, its predictions were too useful to abandon. Still, the foundation began to tremble. Elsewhere in the ancient world, the ideas of Alexandria were carried by traders and travellers into Persia, into the Arab world, into India, translated, preserved, critiqued. And in those lands, new scholars emerged. They inherited the sky, but not its assumptions. In the golden courts of Baghdad, under domes etched with geometric stars, a new generation of sky watchers looked up and looked back. They found in Greek texts not just knowledge, but possibilities. What had been penned by Plato, measured by Hipparchus, modelled by Ptolemy, was not seen as final, but as a beginning. They translated the Almagest with care. They read and reread, but they also tested, checked, corrected. Observation took centre stage again. At the House of Wisdom, founded in the heart of the Abbasid Empire, scholars gathered not to defend dogma, but to question it. They tracked Jupiter's slow march, followed Saturn's return. They watched the moon's rising, measured the solar year down to minutes, and in those measurements, new ideas formed. Al-Battani refined planetary orbits and trigonometric methods. His tables of the sun and moon would later guide the European Renaissance. Al-Sufi reclassified constellations, noting differences between Ptolemy's catalogue and what the eye actually saw. They weren't challenging the structure of the universe yet, but they were questioning how well it had been described. From Samarkand to Cordoba, observatories rose with purpose. The sky was not just above, it was in the heart of libraries, in the ink of ledgers, in the dreams of mathematicians. Each generation built on the last. In India, the Surya Siddhanta spoke of gravity in poetic terms. Aryabhata calculated planetary periods with astonishing precision. Brahmagupta discussed Earth's rotation. The cosmos for them was both divine and numerical, a balance of myth and math. And from these places, knowledge flowed westward, not in conquest, but in translation, carried by scholars across deserts, copied by monks in cold European scriptoria, debated in cathedral schools. Greek became Arabic, Arabic became Latin, and the cosmos began to transform once again. In medieval Europe, Ptolemy's universe found new life. It entered through Spain, through Sicily, through scholars who spoke Latin and Arabic, Hebrew and Greek. It passed from scroll to scriptorium, from memory to manuscript, preserved not as relic, but as foundation. At the universities of Paris and Oxford, students read the Almagest and traced circles in the margins. They learned of the spheres, of the crystalline heavens, of the perfect motion of planets in orbs of glass. They marveled at the precision. They debated the mechanics, but few questioned the structure. And why would they? The stars still rose on time. The moon still waxed and waned. The calendar still turned with the solstices and equinoxes. The sky, it seemed, remained loyal to Ptolemy's geometry. But somewhere in the silence, questions lingered. Why so many circles? Why such elaborate devices? Why, if the heavens were perfect, did they require so much correction? The seeds of a shift had already been sown. In monasteries, in observatories, in the notebooks of restless thinkers, doubt began to stir. Slowly, the center of the universe would begin to tremble. But that revolution, like all revolutions, would begin not with a shout, but with a whisper. And so this chapter closes not with conclusion, but with tension. A sky that once seemed fully measured would soon require reimagining. But that too is a form of reverence. For to question is not to reject. It is to care deeply enough to listen again. While the stars over Greece and Alexandria inspired philosophy and geometry, far to the east, different skies shaped different traditions, equally ancient, equally profound. In India and China, astronomy was not separate from life. It was not a distant science, but an intimate guide, woven into calendars, rituals, medicine, and memory. Here, the heavens were not only measured, they were lived. In India, the cosmos was born from sound. Om, the vibration of creation, resonated through everything. From this sound, the sky emerged, and from sky came time. The Vedas spoke of cycles, of stars that rise and fall, of time measured not just in years, but in yugas, ages that span thousands, even millions of years. In this worldview, astronomy was the heartbeat of the universe. The Surya Siddhanta, a text composed over centuries, offered mathematical models for planetary motion, eclipses, and solstices. It spoke of gravity in poetic terms. It described the tilt of Earth's axis, the length of the solar year, the paths of the moon and sun. And it was written not in cold equations, but in verse. Indian astronomers were both priests and mathematicians. They studied eclipses not to fear them, but to time them. They observed lunar cycles, calculated planetary periods, and aligned temples to solstices and equinoxes. Aryabhata, writing in the 5th century, described the rotation of the Earth, 1500 years before it would be widely accepted in Europe. He gave equations for the motion of the moon and the position of planets. He calculated the value of pi with remarkable precision. He also declared that the Earth was not flat. Later, Brahmagupta expanded on Aryabhata's work. He defined rules for arithmetic with zero, predicted solar eclipses, and explained how lunar and solar cycles differed. His methods influenced Islamic astronomy, and through it, later European science. Yet in India, the sacred and the scientific were never far apart. Astronomy was part of Jyotisha, the science of light. It guided temple ceremonies, agricultural cycles, and even decisions of state. It was not separate from daily life. It flowed through it. And always, behind the numbers, was the rhythm of the sky. Far to the northeast, beneath the shifting shadows of bamboo groves, and under the watchful gaze of mountains, Chinese astronomers also turned their eyes to the sky. But in China, the cosmos was not a place to escape to. It was the framework of society itself. Heaven was not distant. It was immediate. Its patterns mirrored the emperor's rule, the turning of dynasties, the balance of life. Tian, heaven, was the highest authority, and its rhythms guided everything from court rituals to harvests, from military campaigns to medicine. Chinese astronomy began in deep antiquity. By 1300 BCE, oracle bones already recorded eclipses and celestial omens. The Zhou dynasty developed a calendar system based on the movement of the sun and moon. And during the Han dynasty, observatories rose to track the stars with increasing precision. They didn't just name constellations, they assigned them to regions of the empire. The sky became a map of governance. To rule well was to align with the stars. To observe the heavens was to protect the realm. Chinese astronomers developed a complex system of celestial divisions. They identified 28 lunar mansions, sections of the sky through which the moon passed. These became part of the lunar-solar calendar, which harmonized both solar years and lunar months. They observed comets, novae, and planetary conjunctions with meticulous detail. Ancient Chinese records describe guest stars appearing where none had been, possibly supernovae seen long before the telescope. Nothing escaped their gaze. The instruments were no less sophisticated. Armillary spheres modelled the sky. Gnomons measured the sun's shadow to track solstices. Water clocks marked the hours. Some observatories had towers so tall they touched the clouds, offering clearer views of the stars. But Chinese astronomy wasn't just science. It was duty. The imperial astronomer was a guardian of cosmic balance. Eclipses were serious omens, warnings of disorder. Misreading the sky could have political consequences. Aligning the calendar meant aligning the kingdom with heaven. Each night, records were kept. Each dawn, predictions made. The stars spoke, and their message shaped everything from taxes to war. Even poetry bowed to the stars. Chinese poets like Li Bai and Du Fu wove the moon and constellations into verse, using celestial images to express longing, change, or remembrance. A falling star wasn't just light, it was memory, fleeting and sacred. The stars became symbols of fate, of distance, of reunion. And through all this, the cosmic view remained holistic. Yin and yang shaped not only medicine and philosophy, but astronomy too. The heavens were a balance of opposites. The sun and moon, light and dark, fullness and emptiness. The 5 phases, wood, fire, earth, metal, water, guided not only earthly cycles, but celestial rhythms as well. To study the sky was to harmonize with it. And so, while Greek astronomy focused on geometry and epicycles, the Chinese sought integration, a system that explained, yes, but also aligned, one that spoke to rulers, farmers, physicians, and poets alike. The stars did not sit in isolation. They were part of a living system, a universe that breathed with the rhythm of heaven. This tradition of alignment carried through the centuries. Chinese astronomers recorded eclipses for more than 2,000 years. Their logbooks became timelines of cosmic events, used to refine calendars, correct dynastic records, and even challenge historians. The Tang and Song dynasties saw a flowering of astronomical craft. New instruments were invented. Celestial globes rotated with water power. Observatories were rebuilt, expanded, elevated. Shen Kuo, a polymath of the 11th century, wrote about planetary retrograde motion. He understood that these strange loops were not failures of observation, but the result of perspective. The sky, he saw, could deceive the eye, but not the mind. Su Song designed a clock tower in the 11th century with an armillary sphere at its peak. It was driven by a water wheel and housed celestial mechanisms that turned in time with the heavens. Timekeeping and stargazing, joined by engineering. These were not novelties. They were expressions of a world where heaven and earth moved in rhythm. And that rhythm, in both China and India, was always more than measurement. It was a kind of listening, a reverence for order, a devotion to pattern, a quiet belief that in the sky there was not only light, but wisdom. As centuries passed, the wisdom of India and China flowed beyond their borders. Arabic scholars translated Sanskrit and Chinese texts alongside Greek ones. They preserved calendars, models, and observations. They saw in Eastern astronomy not competition, but continuity. European scholars, too, began to absorb these traditions. From Indian sign tables to Chinese lunar cycles, knowledge crossed cultures slowly, like the sun rising over distant mountains. But in their own lands, these systems thrived in a different way. Where the West built models to explain the stars, India and China built lives aligned with them. The cosmos was not only above, it was within. The microcosm reflected the macrocosm. In India, a wedding might be timed by lunar mansions. A farmer might plant by the stars. A temple's inner sanctum might glow only once a year, on the solstice morning, when sunlight aligned perfectly with carved stone. In China, emperors announced the start of spring not by calendar alone, but by celestial signs. To rule in harmony with heaven was to uphold the mandate of balance. And so, these ancient astronomers became something rare. Scientists whose data was also devotion. They did not draw maps of the sky to master it, but to move with it. To live according to the stars was not submission, but alignment. Not fear, but reverence. And this reverence lasted. Long after dynasties fell, after temples aged, the lunar mansions were still known. The solstices still mattered. The zodiac was still honored, not as fate, but as rhythm. In the highlands of Nepal, the deserts of Rajasthan, and the rice fields of southern China, people still look up and know what season it is, what ritual is near, what harmony to prepare for. And yet, these systems also evolved. New tools appeared. Telescopes were introduced. Western models arrived with colonial schools and imperial science. But even then, the older rhythms remained. In India, ephemerides were rewritten in English, but still anchored in Jyotisha. In China, observatories added European instruments, but still tracked the lunar calendar. The world turned, but the stars remained. And so, in the vast and ancient skies of Asia, another truth endures. That astronomy was never just observation, it was remembrance. And in remembering, a people could stay in tune with something greater than themselves. Sometimes, it's not the grand discoveries that endure, but the quiet rituals. A prayer whispered under the full moon, a lamp lit at the winter solstice, a festival that waits for the first star of evening. These are acts of sky watching too. In ancient India and China, the heavens were never far. They lived in the calendar, in the birth chart, in the doorway that caught morning light only once each year. Even today, when satellites blink and data streams across screens, these older connections remain. In Varanasi, priests chant Vedic hymns timed to solar movement. In rural Sichuan, farmers consult lunar dates before planting. In both places, the stars are not distant. They are neighbours, companions, reminders. And this is perhaps the deepest legacy of classical Eastern astronomy, that the sky is not something to explain. It is something to listen to follow, to feel, to trust. And in that trust, to discover not just the motion of planets, but the rhythm of being alive. It's easy, in modern times, to see astronomy as numbers, models, machines. But once, it was a form of reverence. In India and China during the classical era, to study the sky was to study oneself. The heavens weren't only up, they were within. A pulse that matched the breath, a rhythm that guided the heart. Calendars were sacred, aligned not only with seasons, but with virtues. The ideal ruler followed the stars, not to dominate, but to serve, to honour the pattern, to move in time with the heavens. The instruments, sundials, water clocks, armillary spheres, were not cold inventions. They were prayers, cast in bronze and stone, each one a statement of trust, that the sky could be known, and that its knowledge could guide a good life. The mathematics, too, were infused with awe. Trigonometry was not just calculation, it was geometry for the divine, a way to find meaning in the arc of the moon, the path of the sun, the cycle of shadows. And so, across these two great cultures, two truths held fast: that the universe is ordered, and that we are part of that order. Long before telescopes, long before Europe imagined a scientific sky, the peoples of the Americas were watching the heavens. They did not separate the sky from the land, or the stars from the soul. In their world, the cosmos was alive, and Earth was its echo. From the Maya jungles to the deserts of the southwest, from Incan peaks to the temples of the Aztec capital, the sky was more than backdrop. It was calendar, it was compass, it was story, and it was sacred. The Maya were among the most meticulous sky watchers of the ancient world. They built entire cities around celestial events. Pyramids aligned to solstices. Temples marked Venus rising. Their calendar systems tracked solar years, lunar cycles, and the complex rhythm of planetary motion. They measured time not only in days and months, but in vast cycles, counting backwards and forwards through epochs of creation. Their long count calendar could reach across thousands of years. Each baktun, each katun, carried spiritual weight. Time, to them, was not a line. It was a spiral. Venus, especially, held power. To the Maya, Venus was not just a bright light in the sky. It was a being, a force, a marker of war, ritual, rebirth. They tracked its synodic cycle, 584 days, with such accuracy that modern astronomers are still astonished. The Dresden Codex, one of the few surviving Maya manuscripts, contains tables predicting Venus's rise and disappearance. These weren't abstract calculations. They guided rituals, timed sacrifices, marked turning points in leadership and fate. The stars told stories, but they also gave orders, and the buildings themselves listened. At Chichen Itza, El Castillo, the temple of Kukulkan, casts the shadow of a serpent along its stairway during the equinox. The sun does not just shine, it animates. The gods descend in light and shadow. This was not coincidence. It was intention. architecture that lived with the sky. The same was true in other cultures of the Americas. In the Andes, the Inca built their sacred capital, Cusco, in the shape of a puma. Lines from the city pointed to the sun's path, to solstice events, to sacred mountains and stars. The Inca also built towers along the horizon, called sacanas, used to mark the sun's position at key times of the year. Priests would climb them at dawn, watching the sun rise between notched stones. When the sun passed through the right tower, a new season began. This wasn't just astronomy, it was governance. Timekeeping was the foundation of empire. They divided the year into rituals and agricultural tasks. They synchronized planting and harvest to solstices and lunar phases. Ceremonies were held to bless the rains, the crops, the turning of the sky. In Tiwanaku, near Lake Titicaca, the Kalasasaya temple aligned with solar events. Stones marked the extremes of the sun's path, an ancient calendar carved into the earth. Even farther north, the people of Chaco Canyon built structures aligned with lunar standstills, a rare 18.6-year cycle. On one rock wall, a carved spiral is pierced by sunlight only during solstices. For these desert dwellers, the sky was not decoration. It was instruction. They read the heavens like scripture. Among the Aztecs, too, the sky held supreme authority. Their capital, Tenochtitlan, was laid out like a celestial chart. Temples were oriented to solar alignments. The sacred calendar, or Tonalpohualli, was a 260-day cycle used for divination and ritual, while the solar calendar, Xupohualli, guided agriculture and festivals. When these two calendars overlapped every 52 years, a sacred fire ceremony was held. All fires in the empire were extinguished. Priests waited on a mountaintop, watching the stars, praying the world would continue. Only when the Pleiades crossed the zenith did they relight the flame. It was a moment of cosmic renewal. To the Aztecs, the sun was not a guarantee. It needed nourishment. Human sacrifice to them was a gift to ensure the sun would rise. This may sound foreign, but it reflected a deep reverence, a recognition that life depended on forces beyond human control, that the stars, the seasons, the light were not permanent. They were earned, renewed through devotion. In all these cultures, astronomy was more than observation. It was responsibility. The sky was not distant. It was not an object to be charted from afar. It was presence, participation, a teacher whose lessons were written in shadow and light. Every sunrise was a promise, every eclipse a message, every season a voice, and those voices were remembered in petroglyphs etched into canyon walls, in codices painted with jade green and blood-red inks, in chants that echoed across temples, in fields tilled in time with moonlight. These cultures had no telescopes, but they had time. They had no observatories with glass domes, but they had eyes trained by centuries of watching. They had no algorithms, but they had rhythm. Their astronomers were priests, farmers, builders, warriors. They carried the stars not in devices, but in memory. And though much was lost to conquest and fire, the sky remains. It remembers. And in many places, the traditions continue. Today, Maya daykeepers still count sacred time. Andean communities still observe solstice sunrises from ancient towers. Pueblo peoples still tell stories that begin not on Earth, but in the stars. This storytelling, rooted in the stars, was itself a kind of astronomy, not one of equations, but of meaning. The Pleiades weren't just a cluster. They were the seven sisters, chased by Orion across the night. The Milky Way wasn't just a galaxy. It was a river, a road, a trail of souls returning home. In the Americas, the cosmos was never cold. It was intimate. The stars watched. They guided. They wept and celebrated. They held memory. They warned and blessed. And perhaps this is what made indigenous astronomy so enduring. It wasn't a system imposed on the sky. It was a relationship lived with it. Even now, in sky-watching traditions across the hemisphere, elders teach not just what stars are, but who they are. They do not divide observation from ceremony or knowledge from gratitude. They remind us that science once began with awe, and that awe can still lead. Modern science has given us extraordinary tools, telescopes that peer into galaxies, satellites that track comets, software that models the birth of stars. But in the silence of deep night, when no machines hum, the ancient ways still whisper. They speak in campfires and mountain echoes, in the alignment of a doorway, the rising of a constellation, the hush that falls before the solstice sunrise. They remind us that astronomy is not only what we see, but how we listen, that the first observatories were fields, that the first clocks were shadows, that the first astronomers were not separate from their sky, but part of it. And perhaps this is what binds the Mayan priest, the Inca engineer, the Pueblo elder, and the child stargazing tonight on a hillside. Not just stars, but meaning. Not just knowledge, but kinship. Not just history, but presence. For even now, when we ask, "What time is it?" we are repeating a question once answered with stars. In the ruins of the Americas, astronomy lingers not in equations, but in orientation. Not in telescopes, but in stone. Every temple, every plaza, every sacred pathway speaks of alignment. North to south, east to west, light falling through a doorway at just the right moment. Shadows crossing carvings at solstice or equinox. This was knowledge etched not into paper, but into place. These were calendars you could walk through. The Maya, the Inca, the Pueblo, the Muisca, and many others. Each culture held the sky differently, but none dismissed it. None ignored it. To ignore the stars was to ignore time. To misread the heavens was to fall out of harmony. Astronomy was law. It was architecture. It was medicine. It was myth. And even now, archaeologists find new alignments, new structures, forgotten by history, but not by the stars. Buildings that still point to Venus, roads that follow the Milky Way, cities built to match constellations. And always, in these discoveries, a sense of wonder returns. They knew. They knew, not because they had our tools, but because they had time. Time to watch, to wait, to feel the rhythm of sun and shadow, to let generations pass down knowledge, not as data, but as story. A story of how the moon speaks to the tide, how the solstice bends the light, how Venus vanishes and returns. They carved those stories into temples, They told them in dance. They honored them in silence. And so, while the West would come to divide science and spirit, these cultures never did. They measured the heavens to honor them. They aligned with the cosmos, not to control it, but to remain part of it. And perhaps this is the gift they left us, a reminder that knowledge can be beautiful, that to know the sky does not mean to own it, but to live beneath it with open eyes. The stars above the Americas are the same today as they were then. But what we choose to see in them, that is always ours to decide. Today, astronomers launch satellites and probe the cosmos with computers. But across the Americas, others still gather outside, barefoot, wrapped in blankets, eyes lifted. Not to measure, but to mark. Not to analyze, but to witness. On winter mornings, they watch the sun rise between ancient stones. On summer nights, they tell stories about constellations that do not appear on modern charts, but live in memory. These stories are not less true because they are myth. They are true in a different way. They speak of belonging, of continuity, of connection. They remind us that while science explains how the sky moves, culture remembers why it matters. And both are needed. We need precision, but we also need reverence. We need graphs, but we also need gratitude. Because the cosmos is not only a puzzle, it is a presence. It shaped civilizations, guided migrations, inspired art and sacrifice, planted seeds and founded cities. And it still does. For the peoples of the ancient Americas, astronomy was not something they did. It was something they were. So we return to the sky, not just as scientists, but as inheritors. We trace constellations across digital screens. We launch missions beyond the moon. We name new planets orbiting distant stars. But even now, something old moves beneath all that is new. The urge to look up, to understand, to remember, and in that remembering, to feel connected, not just to data, but to depth, not just to stars, but to story, not just to time, but to the timeless. From the jungles of the Maya to the deserts of the Hohokam, from the stones of Tiwanaku to the mountain shrines of the Inca, sky knowledge was preserved, not in silence, but in song, not in secrets, but in ceremony. And as we move forward, this knowledge still matters, because when the night is quiet, and the air is still, and the stars shine just as they did 1,000 years ago, we remember. We remember that others watched, that others wondered, that others knew. And in their memory, we watch again. When the libraries of Greece dimmed, when scrolls were scattered and Rome lay quiet, another light began to rise. It came not from the west, but from the east. From the deserts and riverbanks of the Islamic world, a new age of sky watching began, one that honored what came before and reached for what had never been known. This was not merely a transfer of knowledge, it was a revival. At the heart of this movement stood Baghdad. In the 9th century, it became home to the House of Wisdom, a place where scholars gathered to read, translate, calculate, and dream. Greek texts were recovered, translated into Arabic with care. But they weren't simply preserved. They were tested, refined, challenged. The works of Ptolemy, Aristotle, Hipparchus, they were studied line by line. Commentaries were written, Errors were noted, new observations were made, and through this careful study, a new kind of astronomy was born. The scholars of the Islamic Golden Age were not merely inheritors of knowledge, they were creators. Names like al-Khwarizmi, al-Battani, al-Sufi, al-Zarqali, and Ibn al-Shatir echoed through the observatories of Baghdad, Damascus, Cordoba, and Samarkand. They brought together the sky of Greece, the timekeeping of India, and the observational discipline of Babylon. And from these, they forged something new. Al-Khwarizmi introduced astronomical tables that refined planetary calculations and standardized methods used across the Islamic world. And later, in Europe, al-Battani corrected Ptolemy's values for the solar year and planetary orbits. He observed eclipses, recorded solstices, and adjusted celestial coordinates with care. Al-Sufi mapped stars with poetic sensitivity. In his Book of Fixed Stars, he compared Greek star charts to what he saw in the sky. He added brightness, color, motion, transforming maps into living mirrors. And in this age, the sky was not silent. It was read like a sacred book. Observatories rose like temples of reason. In Marageh, in the 13th century, Nasir al-Din al-Tusi led a team of scholars in designing one of the most advanced observatories of its time. With a library, instruments, and a full team of researchers, it became a model for later centres like Ulugh Beg's Observatory in Samarkand. These were not lone astronomers, they were institutions. Teams of scholars recorded star positions, improved astronomical tables, and built instruments with great precision. They refined the astrolabe, invented quadrant variations, and designed mechanical devices that modelled celestial spheres. Al-Tusi proposed the Tusi couple, a geometric tool to convert circular motion into linear. It would later appear, almost identically, in the work of Copernicus. Ibn al-Shatir, in Damascus, challenged Ptolemy's model with his own refined planetary system. Like Copernicus a century later, he placed the sun at the centre of planetary epicycles, not of the universe, but of motion. His ideas moved westward, quietly echoing in Renaissance models. They didn't abandon the heavens of Ptolemy, but they dared to redraw them. In this golden age, astronomy was not isolated. It was intertwined with poetry, medicine, philosophy, and faith. The Quran urged reflection on creation. The sun and the moon run on their fixed courses, it said. The night and the day, the stars and the trees, all bow to a single order. To study the stars was to approach understanding. Prayer times, fasting months, pilgrimage routes, all were timed by celestial events. The lunar calendar governed holy life. The Qibla, the direction of prayer, was found using astronomy. So scholars became engineers, architects, theologians, geographers. Their charts helped orient mosques. Their instruments found Mecca. Their timekeeping regulated spiritual life. And through it all, a quiet humility guided them. The heavens, they believed, were not theirs to master, but to honour. They looked up not to conquer, but to learn. And as they watched, the stars answered with silence. But within that silence, they heard rhythm, pattern, harmony. And so, with ink and compass, they charted the divine. The instruments they built were more than tools. They were prayers in brass and wood. Astrolabes measured time and angle. They mapped the sky onto a plate you could hold in your hand. With them, you could find the hour, the direction, the position of stars. Sailors used them at sea. Imams used them on land. Travelers trusted them under open skies. Each one was a marvel of geometry and craftsmanship. Some were simple, others ornate, engraved with Arabic script, adorned with floral motifs, pierced with the elegance of a civilization in balance with the cosmos. To trace a star across an astrolabe's face was to touch something eternal. And in mosques, mihrabs echoed this alignment. Their arches framed not only sacred spaces, but also sacred direction, anchored by celestial guidance. Even the domes seemed to mirror the heavens, circles within circles, light falling through lattices like starlight, geometry echoing the logic of the sky. Their architecture did not mimic the stars, it participated in them. And yet, for all its brilliance, this golden age did not last forever. Empires shifted, libraries burned, patronage faded. The centers of learning that once blazed with questions grew quiet. But the knowledge was not lost. It traveled, carried by traders, scholars, pilgrims, and books. From Arabic into Latin, from Damascus to Toledo, from Samarkand to Venice. It entered Europe not as foreign, but as familiar, a continuation of an ancient pursuit, a torch passed, not extinguished. And those who would later revolutionize astronomy, Copernicus, Galileo, Kepler, stood on the shoulders of the stargazers of Baghdad and Cordoba. Their methods, their models, even their instruments bore the marks of Islamic innovation. The Renaissance did not begin in isolation. It began in translation, in conversation, in respect. And perhaps this is the true legacy of the Islamic Golden Age. Not just data or diagrams, but a way of knowing, a way of looking up with humility and seeing in the stars not conquest, but continuity. Continuity not just in knowledge, but in spirit. The Islamic sky was not a map to dominate, but a mirror to reflect upon. Its curves and cycles inspired not only theories, but ethics. Order was sacred. Balance was moral. To understand the stars was to become more just, more harmonious, more whole. This worldview shaped daily life. The morning call to prayer, the crescent moon at the beginning of Ramadan, the sighting of a new moon to mark the year's turning. Time was sacred not only in hours, but in its source. Mosques aligned not with cities, but with constellations. Calendars marked not just planting and pilgrimage, but also patience. The stars taught waiting. The planets taught return. The sky taught that even delay had its rhythm, that even darkness was part of the cycle. And when they studied eclipses, they didn't see them as omens of doom, but as reminders of precision. They didn't ask, "What does this mean for us?" but, "What can this teach us?" To study astronomy in this age was to become a better human being. Even centuries later, the glow of this golden age still lingers in the instruments preserved in museums, in star maps copied into Latin, in observatories built atop earlier designs. But more than artifacts, its legacy lives in an idea that the universe is knowable, that through observation, patience, and thought, the patterns of the heavens can be understood, not only for power or prediction, but for peace. This was the gift of Islamic astronomy, not just what they discovered, but how they discovered it, by listening more than declaring, by refining more than replacing, by building with humility on the stones of the past and leaving something worthy for the future. So when we look back at this era, not through telescopes, but through time, we don't see only names or numbers. We see guardians, guardians of wonder, guardians of order, guardians of questions asked in the dark and answers traced in the stars. And through them, the sky remained alive. To them, the stars were not a puzzle to solve, but a presence to engage. They were part of a creation where everything had meaning. Light had direction, shadow had purpose, motion had memory. Each planet traced not just a path, but a principle. Mars was not only red, it symbolized force. Jupiter was not only large, it signified wisdom. The stars weren't just data, they were dialogue. And the scholars who mapped them did so with intention. They sat beneath lanterns fueled by oil and curiosity. They copied ancient texts with reverence. They argued gently, revised carefully, imagined boldly. The sky did not rush them. Its cycles were long. Its returns were patient. Its teachings, quiet. And perhaps that's what we forget in our haste to understand everything at once. That the stars still turn at their own pace. That some knowledge comes only to those who wait. In the silence between now and the next discovery, the legacy of the Islamic Golden Age still speaks. It speaks through equations, yes, but also through silence, through the elegance of a star chart drawn by hand, through the curve of a brass armillary, through the quiet patience of those who watch the moon rise night after night, noting not just its shape, but its timing, its delay, its light. They learned not to rush the heavens. They understood that truth comes slowly, in arcs. That great understanding builds over generations. And so their work was never only for the present. They wrote for the future. Each manuscript was a gift. Each observation, a trust. Each instrument, a bridge across centuries. And now, centuries later, we cross that bridge. We take up their scrolls, trace their lines, marvel at how close they came to what we now call modern. But perhaps modern isn't so different. It still begins with a question, and that question still begins with a glance upward, a glance that says, there is more to know, more to feel, more to honor. That glance once passed between scholars on distant rooftops, between teachers and students beneath the open night, between the call to prayer and the arc of a planet's light. It said, watch carefully, ask kindly, record truthfully, and build something worthy of the sky. The legacy of the Islamic Golden Age is not found only in the books that survived, but in the spirit they carried, of cooperation, of curiosity, of continuity. It reminds us that science need not be separate from soul. That reason can coexist with reverence, that a celestial model can be built not just with logic, but with love. Love for order, for beauty, for knowledge passed gently across time. And when we honor that lineage, we don't just preserve it, we participate in it. We become, in our way, guardians too. Guardians not of answers, but of questions. Questions that return, century after century, beneath the same constellations. Questions that outlast empires, that rise again when the night is quiet and the stars begin to speak. What moves the heavens? Why do they return? What is our place within it all? These are not questions of one religion or region. They belong to anyone who has ever looked up and wondered. They belong to us all. The scholars of the Islamic Golden Age did not ask them first, nor did they answer them last, but they honored them deeply, seriously, with wonder and skill. They showed that astronomy could be sacred and rigorous, that mathematics could be a kind of devotion, that to trace the path of a planet was to take part in something greater than oneself. And so, as we continue our journey through the ages of sky watching, we carry their wisdom with us, not as relic, but as rhythm that does not end with the stars, but begins again with each new pair of eyes that learns to follow them. Today, in museums and manuscripts, in observatories and open skies, their legacy continues. When a student learns to use an astrolabe, when a teacher explains the motion of Mars, when a prayer aligns with a moonrise, these moments echo their work, not in imitation, but in continuation. Their legacy is not only what they measured, but what they modelled. Patience, precision, perspective, and reverence for the night, for the mystery, for the subtle truth that no matter how much we know, the stars will always offer something more. They teach us that science and story are not rivals, that faith and reason are not enemies, that curiosity, guided by respect, can span continents and centuries. And so we honor them, not only in history, but in practice, by looking up, by learning slowly, by listening still. In the great stone cathedrals of medieval Europe, the sky was not outside, it was inside. It lived in stained glass, in arches that reached like ribs of heaven, in domes that echoed the shape of the firmament. The church was not just a place of prayer, it was a model of the cosmos, and the cosmos itself was a cathedral. In this world, Earth stood still at the center of creation. Around it, the heavens turned, perfect, crystalline, unchanging. The stars, the sun, the moon, all moved in circles, guided by divine will. Above them, spheres of angels. Beyond them, the throne of God. This vision was not questioned. It was revered. Drawn from Aristotle and Christian theology, it offered comfort, clarity, and purpose. The universe had order. That order had meaning. And within that meaning, humanity found its place. Time flowed not by clocks, but by bells. Seasons turned not by instruments, but by festivals. And knowledge, like the stars, came from above. Universities emerged under cathedral spires. Monks and scholars copied ancient texts by candlelight. They read Aristotle in Latin, interpreted the heavens through scripture, and debated the nature of motion, light, and form. This was the world of the scholastics. Thomas Aquinas blended theology and Greek philosophy, arguing that reason and revelation were not enemies, but companions. In his hands, Aristotle became a servant of faith. The unmoved mover became God. And so, the Ptolemaic cosmos, refined, diagrammed, taught, found a new home in the minds of Europe's brightest students. They learned of celestial spheres, of perfect circles, of planetary epicycles that danced with elegance around a stationary Earth. It was not yet science as we know it. It was something closer to architecture, logic as structure, belief as stone, sky as sanctuary. And it held for centuries. And why not? The system worked. It predicted the motions of the planets, imperfectly, but reliably. It aligned with scripture. It mirrored the architecture of belief. And it gave a place for everything: the sun, the stars, the angels, the soul. It made sense of a world filled with mystery. But slowly, questions began to stir. Not rebellions, but ripples. A few scholars noticed irregularities. Planetary positions didn't quite match their tables. Epicycles multiplied. Corrections piled atop corrections. And though the system held, it felt increasingly fragile. In the churches, the stars still circled heaven. But in the margins of manuscripts, scribes were drawing loops and asking, why? Outside the cathedral, clocks began to change the sound of time. Towers marked hours, not with prayers alone, but with gears. The sky had always been sacred. Now it began to feel mechanical. This was the beginning of a quiet shift, a slow drift from symbol to system, from awe to analysis. Scholars still wrote in Latin, still studied the heavens from within a religious worldview. But their tools were changing. Mathematics grew more precise, tables more detailed, instruments more reliable. They began to catalogue not just stars, but errors, not just paths, but deviations. And as they did, a new kind of curiosity emerged. Not just, what does it mean? But, what exactly does it do? It was subtle, but it changed everything. Monastic scribes turned into timekeepers. Philosophers began to measure. Cathedrals that once mirrored the sky gave way to towers that charted it. The heavens were still divine, but they were also measurable. And that measurability made people wonder. If the stars followed rules, could those rules be discovered? If the planets wobbled, could those wobbles be explained? If time was kept by bells, could it also be kept by stars? These questions didn't yet shatter the medieval sky, but they stirred within it. By the 14th century, thinkers like Nicole Oresme and Jean Buridan were imagining Earth's motion. They didn't reject Aristotle, but they tested him. Gently, logically, with care. Could the Earth spin? Could motion be relative? Could the heavens be simpler than they appeared? Such thoughts remained whispers, but they were new. Meanwhile, in cathedrals and classrooms, diagrams of the cosmos were drawn on chalkboards and carved into stone. 9 spheres, crystal heavens, a moon that turned, planets in circles upon circles. Beyond them, the Empyrean, a realm of fire and God. It was beautiful. It was complete. But deep within that completeness, a crack had formed. That crack would not split open overnight, but it grew. It grew with every misalignment between theory and sky, with every new measurement that didn't fit the model, with every curious student who asked, why not a simpler way? The scholastic world still defended its universe, but doubt had entered. Not doubt in faith, but in interpretation, in geometry, in the layers of complexity that now felt like scaffolding holding up something no longer solid. The idea of change was unsettling. The cosmos had always been eternal, perfect, unchanging, and yet the very act of measuring, of observing, was beginning to show that change might be part of the design. In the cathedral, the stars still circled God, but in the observatory, they started to circle questions. And yet even in this tension, there was reverence. The scholars of the medieval world were not iconoclasts. They were caretakers. They sought harmony, not rebellion. They believed truth could be discovered, but never rushed. And so, they preserved what they had, even as they quietly prepared for what might come. They passed down star charts and syllogisms. They copied texts that stretched back to Greece, to Babylon. They built towers and calendars, taught logic and astronomy side by side. In their hands, the cosmos was both sacred and shared. They laid the groundwork for a transformation they would not live to see. And when that transformation came, when Copernicus dared to shift the center, when Galileo looked through a telescope, it came not as a sudden break, but as a slow unfolding, a revealing, a continuation of questions first whispered in the vaulted halls of stone. And so, even as the stars began to shift in the minds of men, they still glowed in stained glass and stone. Even as models changed, the memory of the medieval cosmos lingered, in poetry, in prayer, in the quiet rhythms of village life. The farmer still planted by the moon, the monk still charted eclipses, the child still looked up at the evening sky and whispered the same questions that had echoed through cloisters and councils and classrooms. What moves the stars? What lies beyond them? And are we part of that pattern, or only watching from below? The cathedral sky may not have been accurate by modern standards, but it was honest to its time. It was whole. And in its wholeness, it offered something rare. A vision, not just of the universe, but of a universe that meant something. And that meaning did not fade, even as the framework began to fall away. For the world of the cathedral taught something deeper than diagrams. It taught attention. It taught order. It taught that the heavens are not just above us. They shape how we live, how we think, how we pray. Even in its errors, it held wisdom. It reminded us that the cosmos is not just facts, but frameworks. Not just reality, but relationship. And that to truly understand the sky, we must ask not only what it is, but what it means to us. In a way, that was the heart of medieval astronomy. Not just models, but meaning. A universe you could feel. A universe you could trust. A universe that taught you where you stood and why it mattered. So when Copernicus looked up and questioned the center, he was not destroying that cosmos. He was honoring it by continuing its greatest tradition, to wonder. To wonder is not to doubt, but to open the door of thought, to open the window of perspective, to let new light fall across old truths. And so the medieval world, with all its certainty and structure, did not close the sky. It framed it. It shaped a space in which future questions could form. It taught how to observe, not just with the eye, but with the soul. It taught how to build, not just buildings, but systems. And it taught how to listen, not only to God, but to creation itself. This is the quiet gift of the world of the cathedral. It showed that even fixed ideas can hold flexible truths, that reverence need not fear revision, that every model is a moment, never final, always part of a larger arc. And from that arc, the next age would rise, with new eyes and a new centre. But before that new centre could be drawn, the old one had to be fully understood. And so the cathedral cosmos, even in its twilight, remained luminous. Its diagrams, copied in margins, its spheres, etched into wood, its songs, timed by the stars, its seasons, ruled by constellations. It was a universe you could feel as much as describe. And that feeling stayed. It stayed in the stained glass of Chartres, where zodiac signs encircle saints. It stayed in medieval manuscripts, where angels turn the spheres. It stayed in the liturgy, the litany, the calendar. This was a cosmos that did not separate fact from meaning, that did not measure without metaphor. It was whole, and it held, until a Polish cleric looked again and asked a question not of defiance, but of curiosity. What if Earth moved? What if the sun stood still? What if everything we thought we knew needed to be turned inside out? Copernicus would not publish his ideas for decades. He hesitated. He calculated. He revised. Because he knew he was not just adjusting a model. He was disturbing a universe of meaning. But that disturbance would begin gently. And that gentleness was a gift from the medieval world. It had prepared the mind to think long thoughts, to accept mystery, to believe that understanding took time, that even sacred truth must sometimes be refined. So the shift would not come with violence. It would come as light, as a recentering, not only of planets, but of perspective. A perspective shaped not only by data, but by devotion, by centuries of minds trained to see purpose in pattern, to see rhythm as divine, to trust that the sky, though mysterious, was meaningful. That trust did not disappear when Copernicus shifted the centre. It travelled with him. His sun-centred model still held to circles, still honoured harmony, still searched for order. He did not break the medieval sky. He turned it gently toward the next age. And so the world of the cathedral, the world of the scholastics, did not end. It evolved. It passed its torch to the astronomers of the Renaissance, to the mathematicians who would model motion, to the thinkers who would dare to ask what lies beyond the outermost sphere. And when they asked, they did so from within a tradition that taught, the sky is not chaos, it is structure, it is story, it is sacred. And the sacred need not be static. It can turn, it can expand, it can orbit new truths without losing old wisdom. The medieval cosmos may have placed Earth at the centre, but its heart was never geography. Its heart was reverence. Its heart was meaning. Its heart was the belief that we belong in the universe, that we are not accidents, we are participants. So when the centre moved, meaning remained. The stars did not fall. They realigned. And with them, a new story began. A story built on the foundations laid in candlelight, written in ink on vellum, carved into stone by scholars who never saw a telescope, but knew how to wonder. The sky they knew was different than ours, but their questions are the same, and we carry them still. The sun had always risen, but now it would rise at the centre, not in myth, but in motion, not in symbol, but in system. When Nicholas Copernicus proposed a heliocentric model of the cosmos, he did not shout. He did not demand. He calculated. He paused. He hesitated. Because he understood what he was doing. He was not just placing the sun where Earth had always been. He was shifting a worldview, moving more than planets. He was moving perspective. Born in Poland in 1473, Copernicus was a scholar, a cleric, a quiet man of numbers. He studied medicine, law, astronomy. He read Ptolemy. He learned from Islamic star tables. He examined the heavens with inherited tools and found the model wanting. It worked, but it was cluttered, complex, full of corrections that felt like apology. And he asked, what if we put the sun at the center? What if Earth moved? What if the sky we watched was not circling us, but we were turning within it? This was not a new idea. It had been whispered by the Greeks, murmured by some Islamic scholars, but it had never taken root. It had never been fully built. Copernicus built it. He modelled planetary paths with the sun at the centre. He showed how retrograde motion, those strange backward loops of planets, could be explained not by epicycles, but by perspective. He held on to circles. He held on to harmony. He honoured the medieval search for order, but he turned the model. And in doing so, he turned history. His book, De Revolutionibus Orbium Coelestium, was published in 1543, the year he died. Perhaps he waited, knowing the shock it might cause. Perhaps he hoped that silence would soften resistance. What he gave the world was not certainty, but a new question. The question was simple. What if the sun is still, and we are not? But the answer changed everything. It changed the meaning of up and down. It redefined motion and rest. It placed Earth not on a pedestal, but on a path of orbit, a journey through space. For some,